Good afternoon, Seattle. Welcome to your afternoon newscast. We're here to bring you stories that matter most. Today marks the 16th anniversary of the tragic genocide. Commemorations are being held all around the world.
아무것도 안 하셨어요.
Was hast du während des Völkermords gemacht, Großvater? Mais tout était devant vos yeux. Did you just watch it? وفي ماما بينما يقتل أطفال مثلنا.
Welcome to the Daily Wrap-Up, a concise show dedicated to bringing you the most relevant, independent news as we see it from the last 24 hours. Friday, December 6th, 2024, and boy, it is good to be back sitting here. It's been far too long for me to not be diving into this stuff. If you caught my briefly joining and Wake Up this morning, we talked about a bunch of stuff and was just kind of trying to get caught up on what everyone's been dealing with. But we have a lot to cover today. And I want to make a point of what really, put it this way, a lot to cover this week. And what I'm planning on doing today, and I'm going to get into just briefly an update on something and one of the reasons, if you have been following every show, why I wasn't, the Daily Wrap-Up has been absent for more than usual with this week in particular. This week, what I'm going to do, what I'm planning, I tweeted recently that I'm coming back at this for a few different reasons. Just there's a fire that's lit under my, you know what, and I'm regardless of what's going on, it's important to me that we push harder than ever. And so what I've decided to do today is I'm coming back and seeing so much to over the last week and even more, so many different topics that I want to get into. It was just impossible to cover in one show. So I'm going to basically try to get to all these larger topics just over the last week and add to what's going on as well. Over the next so many weeks, I'm planning to do 5 shows in a row this week, if not more than that, and just keep going. And so my plan is to sort of roll these together and try to get to some of these larger topics. So in the point in all saying all that, I will have a few things to say in general about foreign policy, but today I decided to put that off until tomorrow, and we will be getting that into tomorrow. And I made a point about this morning, almost about how incredible it is that of everything going on, and almost making that point with that's BitChute. That keeps happening. On that note, I have a positive thing to say about BitChute as well. But what that ultimately kind of almost backs up what I was saying this morning, which is ultimately that it blows my mind that a genocide, the most live stream genocide in history, the most, I think, visible genocide we've ever seen, is something becoming almost sort of like a secondary story. Even as you could tell, like, just because it is something that honestly, from my perspective, it's because I'm of the mind that the people that we're trying to reach with this are by and large very aware of what's going on. The people out there that don't need, the people that are in positions to change it, I don't think are confused about what's happening. And so it's sort of, the point is to continue to make sure we're aware of it. And I'm going to keep covering it extensively because I think it's going to be and is currently the biggest story of our lifetimes. But today, I think it's important to get caught up on some of these other things going on. And I will start with a few points around foreign policy as well. But by and large, today, it's going to be really what I decided to do today was just sort of go at the things that kind of caught my attention first, or really just by organic, just default ended up being the thing that was put in front of me first. And I put aside a lot of things we're going to get to, and you'll see what I mean as we go through it. Like you saw in the title, there's some of these different larger stories that many we've covered already in the past that have become more important focal points today. But I do think it's important that we highlight how just all-encompassing the genocide ongoing that the U.S. government, the UK, and Israel, and everybody else is involved with, not allowing, but involved with on the ground, cannot be something that we allow to become a passive conversation. It just can't. Now, my point again is to go through all of this over the week. Now, my update in regard to what the last so many days have been involving, and there's a lot more as well in that, but just one of the things I wanted to update you on, and one of the reasons why there's been a lot going on, is one of the lawsuits. Now, we recently were in mediation for far too long around trying to resolve one of them. Now, long story short, the bottom line was it was definitely a win as I see it. Now, obviously, it's a loss for me no matter what. If you've been following the story, the lawfare dynamic is that we lose because we're spending way more than we have in order to even try to fight it, which is ultimately how this one ended up. And realize there's technically four, this one's about to be resolved, 4 copyright lawsuits that are, in my opinion, completely illegitimate, acting in good faith, and they're either fair use or what I believe were Creative Commons. And once I was told otherwise, ultimately pulled it down. Intent, as even just discussed in this recent mediation, is the main part of it. Either way, the point is that this one, with 3 more coming, which is the idea of more engagement, money that has to fly out the door. Ultimately, my lawyer just dumped tens of thousands of dollars bills on me in regard to multiple lawsuits. We were able to ultimately resolve this in mediation in a win, because I think ultimately we ended up having the upper hand in the conversation, where they recognized the juice was not worth the squeeze in order to track down and waste everybody's time, including the judge, who appeared to, through the mediator, express frustration that we were wasting time on such a small amount of money, which to me is a lot. But the guy's talking about a $150 million case. We're waiting. The point is that we pushed back. They ultimately tried to strong arm and to say that, we demand at least this much. And I basically just said that if you do that, nothing's going to happen. And they ultimately settled for an amount that they've spent more just in setting up the mediation. So the point is, I'm not trying to get into too much detail. The point is that this law firm lost money to go after me in this case. Now, whether that is, my opinion is that somebody is driving these things. Then what? I don't believe that's the law firm. That doesn't make sense to me. Could be. My point would be, though, that the law firm went at this because they were told to, or paid to, or driven to, and lost money, which either means the person spending that had to lose money, or that this was the design just to waste my time. I don't know. But it's nice to know that there is, my point is that there's a positive note on this, that we ultimately were able to show that through the resistance, through the, spending money to ultimately make them lose, I think it was worth it in the long run. But the point all around is still that we have to pay all this money just to be able to push back on this illegitimate process. And that's the lawfare of it all, which we see all over the place. It's crazy, the system we're in. And one of the main things we're going to talk about today over all this stuff is that, as always, we don't live in the world we think we do. The people out there, the current administration, the previous administration, they are not who they pretend to be. Simple as that. And it's time for us as Americans, as grown-ups, to start being real about that and acknowledge what we can see. And one of them is the reality of the current system we live in. As somebody recently said, and I said this morning, it's just sad but true, that rich people get lawyers, poor people go to jail. That's the world we live in, and that's not the world we should allow to exist. We should be fighting to change that, and not just fighting to pretend to change it and allow people to, the same people to step in, and we'll get into today with the 9th or 10th billionaire added to Trump's administration. Pretty sure that's not an outsider fighting anything. But the other note I wanted to highlight today, which I'm very happy to point out, just officially finished discussing the ambassador program, as they're calling it, for BitChute. Now, BitChute is ultimately trying to give themselves a facelift, trying to revolutionize what they're doing. And again, as I've said from as far as we ever talked about this, of all the platforms out there, BitChute is one of, if not the most protective of free speech, honoring it rather, like no censorship, and in a large way to their detriment. Continuing to get, people that don't want to advertise, or people that don't want to, work there, put their videos there because of how we see how vitriolic and disgusting and racist the comments are. I'm of the mind, and I'm very clear about this, I think that's being done. Clearly that's what free speech will look like. You'll find people that are disgusting because there are people out there that are like that. And we have to respect the fact that that is free speech, and we have the free speech to tell them what we think they are. The point, though, is that I think on top of that, with the bots and everything else, as even Gab pointed out, the moment that they blocked IP addresses from Israel, whatever you think about that, suddenly their bot problem vanished. I think that's very clear. And I think we're all very aware of what's really going on. It has nothing to do with Jewish people. It has to do with the government, has to do with, or insofar as Jewish people overlapping with Zionism, yes, but any other Zionist overlap that is causing this, it's very clear what's going on. And what's important to highlight, though, is that BitChute is somebody that is fighting for that in the context of all that's going on, all of the attacks and the pressure and the threats, and they're standing by it. In fact, leaning into it. And so they reached out to me, as I mentioned, I don't know, a couple of weeks ago, and wanted to work with me, wanted to help support TLAV, and in no way, shape, or form, as you know, I would never allow. Is there anything that has to do with, really, honestly, there's not even any obligation other than me committing to help grow their platform and help support what they're doing, which I believe in. And so it's important to highlight that there's no influence on content. There's no ability of them to tell me I need to do this or say that or post this or engage. It's all of my own volition. And I really respected that. That was the point, was it's sort of like on an agreement of good faith. And that is the kind of thing that I want to see more of. And so the point being is if I just don't do anything and I just ignore it and never talk about BitChute, the point is they can just disregard the contract will go away. And so at the moment, it has to do ultimately with the growth of the platform. And if they succeed, so do I. So my point is, guys, I think if the fact that BitChute is supporting the last American Vagabond, and we clearly do believe in what they're doing, and it is free speech, then we should be supporting BitChute. And so that's why I'm going to start leaning into that more. And I think it's important that we do. Now, I'm still going to be posting everywhere, like always. I'm still going to be doing pretty much everything I've done the same way, but I'm going to try to advocate for people to go there and support what they're doing, like I have been anyway. And I want to be clear, I'm not only doing this because they're deciding to support me. I've already been doing that. I'm just happy to lean into it more because I do believe in what they're doing. And I would never take on an agreement like that I didn't believe in. All that to say, let's start supporting BitChute more because I do believe they're going in the right direction, and I do believe they're fighting for what we're fighting for. And the moment that we see something different, then we can talk about it and we can change direction. But I believe in what they're doing right now. So on that note, let's get into some main parts of today, which actually the one last thing is to start with that opening clip, which we're going to start with in general, is I mean, the way that the clip was made is a little bit after school special feeling to me, but either way, it's powerful to think about. And as you can see here on the tweet that the person that shared this, she simply says, and I unfortunately wasn't able to find the original where this came from. So if you know who made this, let me know so I can give them credit and shout it out. But Joanna shared this, and she says, Palestine, fast forward to 2040. Why didn't we do anything? And guys, if you've ever wanted to be able to see into the future, you're looking at it. It doesn't really, whether they win or don't get held accountable or whatever horrible thing I hope doesn't happen comes to pass, people will not forget what happened. This will be discussed. It will be remembered because it was documented in real time. It's very important to think about that. Even with the technocratic censorship and what's the right term for it? Cultivating history through algorithmic manipulation and YouTube changing videos, whatever. People will not forget this. So when this time comes to pass, we finally, whatever that looks like, get beyond this time frame, people will ask this question. How did you possibly let that happen? How is it possible that you could have not seen how clear that was? Because remember, hindsight is always 20/20. People will look back and see it. The question to you is, what did you do? And we always ask this question. What would you have done if you were in World War II? This comes up. As we've always said, and it's been ad nauseum pointed out, but it's correct. Now you know. And she also points out, what about Syria, Congo, Yemen, Libya, Donbass? She's correct. Not one human life matters no matter where it is or taken, right? That's important to highlight. So there's all the weird thing that we see a lot of the Zionists do. They're like, well, you didn't care about this. Why do you care about that? Which, by the way, suggests they're saying that if you didn't care about that genocide, you shouldn't care about our genocide, which is pretty disgusting to think that's their argument. The point is that we've all cared about these things. People like Vanessa Beeley and Eva Bartlett have been screaming about Donbass for a long time. The point is that the establishment doesn't care. The partisan screamers get a lot of people to not look at it. But Iraq, for example, Libya, people have been screaming about these things. Yes, these were, whether you want to argue that the actual definition of genocide was met, these are all war crimes. War crimes committed by the very people pretending to fight against war crimes. That is the reality of the world we live in. So if you want to change that, obviously this has happened. We're in it. It's happened. It's already going on. Right now, Lebanon and Gaza are still being actively genocided as we speak. What did you do? I think it's important to ask yourself what you are doing. At the very least, just being aware of it, pointing it out, not being okay supporting companies that are allowing it to continue. Now, all that's to say that we're going to go into this in much, much more depth as we have been since it started and well before October 7th, tomorrow, and the day after that. But I wanted to make sure we saw that, and I'm going to give you a couple of quick points to highlight what's going on, and then we're going to jump into the Dioxin conversation. To start, we're going to be ending with the conversation of Elon Musk's satellite network, which Derek just knocked out of the park. So if you were hoping to see that first, it'll be at the end of the show, but make sure you stay tuned. There's a lot to talk about. I wanted to start with one point about propaganda that I just found really fascinating. And this is where we are today. Oh, I was pretty sure I shared that. That's crazy. Well, make sure you share that. So somebody sent me this video and simply just said, hey, this is interesting. It is an interesting video. Now, I just happen to have already seen this because, we're constantly seeing all the weird things that pop up. Even any of you that are doing this like we do, or just maybe you're just, whether it's because of the show you run or did you just immersed in social media, and hopefully you're not. The point is, I don't think I'd be if I didn't have to be. The point is that when you're in this every day, you see the patterns. You see the same videos that resurface every so many years as the new thing we never saw. And it's just usually repackaged, like we saw with, for example, Lahaina, where we all knew what was going to happen. All those same Transformer videos from 4 years ago, they all pop up and go, look what we just saw in Lahaina. And most of us are like, nope, that's that same old video. Every time that happens. And every time people fall for it, it's just the way it works. People are a little too, a la Twitter files, right? That's what was done to do. This is a clip from a show called Disjointed. Now, people do say it in the comments. What it's important to highlight is this has 2.3 million views. And the vast majority of people commenting are just going, wow, like this is crazy. The point is, even the title says, this is a cartoon that is said to have been made in the 70s. Said to have been made? This is just wild to me. To cut to the chase, I'll play it really quickly. This video on Facebook, I don't know whether this guy did it himself or whether he's just sharing it, Jason Borelli. Somebody went out of their way to take the video, remove the audio, add some random background music, cut it into this thing, and then add the type that says, said to have been made in the 70s. Knowing they're lying. Understand, because if you had to do that, that means you knew you cut off the audio, which explained that it was this. A scene from Disjointed from the 2018 Netflix show. And my point in the earlier 30 seconds ago is that if you've been following, you're on Twitter, you've already seen this pop up here and there over the years because it was interesting. Now, the point is, I'll play it really quickly. It is a clip. Oh, actually, never mind. I don't think I have it to play. It's not. The point is, the clip is, it's a random clip where they're sitting painting inside, and it was a dispensary. That's called Disjointed was the name of the show. And they're painting things. And this one woman has like a flashback or whatever the context was, it jumps into her mind, right? And all of a sudden she sees this weird kind of all-encompassing thing where you see people marching into buildings and you see 9/11 happen and you see LUFO. And the point was people are going, oh my God, somebody made this 1970 video that showed all these things. And 2.3 million people were like, whoa, that's crazy. My point is simple. People are, whether this was, I honestly think this is just some random guy that thought he got a lot of shares and clicks out of it and just deliberately tried to misinform everybody from who knows. So you guys don't need to know this. You all know this already. But I just think it's fascinating how much of this is going on to such an extreme level. And that's not even getting into like the malicious government-led foreign entities, the partisan back and forth. Just question everything, guys. I think that's the point. It's important. That's just wild to me how much reach these things get. Now, if you had posted this and said, hey, here's a thing from 2018, wouldn't have got as much reach, right? Maybe they even made money. Maybe they're getting Facebook clicks and people make money off these things. And yet when we come out with well-researched work that should be bought just independent media that should go round the world and back. And I'm going to show you 3 points about that today alone. Of course, it goes nowhere. Would if it was somebody in the mainstream alternative media that was saying a fraction of the same point, but that's how this works. So we're going to go into the Dioxin thing after this opening point, and I want to show you that I'm going to give you the evidence about the whole treated vinyl chloride because I've mentioned it many times in the context of Conyers, Georgia, but I want you to see that from the East Palestine point to recognize how clear this is, that the corporate media reported that this was something that it was treated versus something that was going to explode, and you don't hear that anywhere. Not in any conversation, even one currently today rehashing that same story. It's just the point in that is to show you how controlled this stuff is. that no matter how much work we do, no matter how well researched it is, no matter how, that there's a way to make sure these things just don't go past a certain level. I'm sure we could find a way around that in some way. I think there is a level of organic reach that does somehow in ways go around that, but just realize that that is what we're fighting against. And that's what, I guess the other point on top of that is just do not be swayed by whatever the current thing is. You consider it, but to be swayed by whatever the current large talking heads are pointing to is usually the way this trap works. Consider it, but ask yourself what else is going on, and also go out of your way to look for people in the independent media. So, by the way, I was just rehashing the idea about it's important to me that we highlight some of the smaller people in this field who are not getting the credit they deserve because they came into it at a bad time and are objective and nonpartisan and will probably never get past a certain barrier. I'm surprised that we've gotten to where we are. So before we get into that, I wanted to highlight a few important points that are going on in foreign policy. Now, Jeremy Scahill wants to point it out because you might have seen that Donald Trump made these threats, as well as one recently we'll get to later in the show about BRICS and the dollar. You know, the outsider is threatening the rest of the world to maintain dollar hegemony because that's what outsiders do, right? In this case, he threatened Hamas. All hell to pay in the Middle East if the hostage is not released. Which, by the way, as Jeremy makes fun, it's silly to think that they're going to cower because Trump said something that he doesn't even know what's going on right now. He doesn't have the intel. He's outside. He doesn't even sign the contract yet to get. The point is, him saying that is pretty silly, knowing that, by the way, the U.S. government and Netanyahu and the Israeli government have actively maintained, sabotaged every single element of this. And their own people say that. So this means Trump is either that out of the know, even from just headline news from Israel, or he's still lying for Zionism, which I think is pretty obvious. But he threatens them to release the hostages, which they won't do because then they'll be murdered immediately. Whatever you think, whether that's good or bad, the point is, logically speaking, it's the only bargaining chip they have. So this is all about, as he highlights, Trump trying to make it look like anything positive that happens is because he yelled out loud. But it says the statement from Hamas is that since the beginning of the genocide, Hamas has publicly announced they've been actively seeking a ceasefire, which, by the way, is the most easily verifiable thing in the whole conversation. The Times of Israel wrote the 9th and the 10th of October last year, they were actively trying to seek a full ceasefire, full exchange, and Netanyahu continually said no. And now we know today that he's been foiling that since day one. Their own media has written this. Haaretz, Times of Israel, I've shown you 45 times. Because, however, Netanyahu, he writes, have sabotaged all of these attempts. But due to his savage actions and decisions, these deals broke. Therefore, Hamas understands, and this is what he's writing. I don't know if you could argue they know this, but he's trying to frame it in a way that makes sense, that Trump's message is actually directed towards Netanyahu. They need to end their evil game by using negotiations to release the hostages. Now, you could read it that way. I think he's only saying it that way to argue that's how Hamas would interpret it intentionally, because they've been trying to, is their point. Hamas is committed to immediately implementing a Security Council Resolution 2735. He said, we're looking forward to the daytime seeing an end of the genocide against our people. Their free return back to their homes all over Gaza. Our people are eager to secure a better future. And he simply goes, a couple thoughts. Trump's bombastic threats to unleash some untold horror if the Israeli and U.S. captives are not released occurs as ceasefire talks have resumed. Hamas is not going to do something or tremble in fear because of Trump's threats of future action. The timing does indicate Trump is looped in on the potential deal, I disagree, being negotiated, and wants to set himself up to take credit for any success in the release of hostages. I get the sense, this is just all just our opinions, but I get the sense this is Trump just trying to lob this in the air. And so if Biden's administration tries to get some end for their, on the way out benefit for their reputation, that he could pretend it was because what he's yelled out loud. That's what I think. In any case, the point is Trump actively saying there'll be hell to pay if you don't. Please highlight for me how that gives you the indication of him ending this war, especially in a pro-Israel way that they're all talking. This will be him going, or I shouldn't say especially in a pro-Israel. The point is, I think most people want this to stop. Even most of their supporters. And that's why they keep pretending Trump said he would end it all, right? That's not the case. This is him continuing this, giving them a blank check, which they already have, by the way. That's just all narrative, Trump versus Biden. They both give them a blank check to continue to go after anybody in Palestine because they didn't do what you demanded for nothing. So please show me how that can be as an end to anything. It's the same. What's the saying? Out with the old boss, same as the new boss or whatever. Like, this is the same damn thing because they are the same thing. But as this all Rod points out, Netanyahu never actually wanted an end. A child could see that today. The evidence is right there for you. And here's Times of Israel. Netanyahu says ready for ceasefire in Gaza to free hostages, but won't end the war. And what we're right. This is like day 7 narrative. We're right back in the beginning. They played the game. Well, we want to end, but we don't want to end the war. Well, guess what, stupid? That's the whole thing everybody's calling for. The entire thing about this is ending that. The point is a ceasefire means an end to the war. So he keeps saying, yes, we want an end to the war, but not if there's an end to the war. That's what he's saying. He knows people are falling for this because they want to. The reality is you can't ask for a ceasefire and the stipulation being is that there's no ceasefire, because that's actually what he's been doing. And even Israeli media has been calling for that. But it's all about a game of words. And as we've shown you 100 times, they have made sure it does not stop. And just to show you some of the horrifying things that are actually happening, as the chairman of the Euromed Human Rights Group says, we've observed an increase. This is on the 30th of November, an increase in the pace of targeted killings carried out by Israeli forces in Gaza, targeting local activists working in civil media relief fields. Guys, this is a relief worker. Just take a look at this. It's not as graphic as some of the others, but guys, this is an individual who got hit so directly with some of these munitions that they're still smoldering on his body. These are not Hamas, not militants. These are civilians. Kind of hard to hide those, isn't it? This is where we are. And Lebanon is even more obvious. Now, lastly, on the pogrom overlapped, Amsterdam, one of these of the hundreds of easily provable fake stories from Israel since the beginning of October 7th forward. But my point is that's the Amsterdam lie. Zachary Foster points out Israeli news. Israeli news is covering dozens of Israeli terrorists who are setting fire to buildings and vehicles in the West Bank, waiting for world leaders who apparently care so much about pogroms to issue condemnations and impose consequences to the perpetrators. It's unreal how obvious this continues to be. There's no complicated part of the story. These are settlers who are burning anybody's homes who are not Israeli. And in Lebanon, in case you were curious, 62 times, they have violated the ceasefire, according to Craig Murray, who was on the ground and has a very respectable background in regard to reporting the news, if that matters more to you than just proving it based on the facts. The bottom line, easily verified. From the moment this started, they were violating the ceasefire. Then it became, well, they fired on us, so now they broke the ceasefire. Well, they responded because you never stopped firing. But that's how the game goes. And here's even CNN, if you can believe that, who's reporting the same thing. Israel has violated the ceasefire about 100 times. If even CNN is reporting what we can see, that means that it's so obvious that they have to. That's what I would argue. And yet, here we are with our corporate media, for the most part, in most cases, and the government blindly supporting this. Now, on Syria in general, I highly recommend you check out my recent discussion with Vanessa Beeley on the first, the truth about what is happening in Syria. Now, a lot's happened since then, but it is still the base reality of this. You can see ISIS patches on the people that they were sending in. This was not what it looks like. This is yet another false flag psyop dynamic that the U.S. government and Israel are conducting in Syria, I think primarily to hinder the flow of weapons to Hezbollah, which, by the way, if your issue is that the weapons are going to a group, then recognize that the U.S. government sends weapons to groups in the world more than anybody else anywhere you could point to, and more dangerous groups than anyone you could talk about. Far more dangerous, far more terroristic than Hezbollah or Hamas or anybody else. Of course, then recognizing Hezbollah is not a terrorist organization. That's just something the U.S. says about people they don't like. Bottom line is this is a lie, and what they're doing is destroying anything that's in their path, breaking sovereignty, murdering civilians as long as they can stop a legal action conducted by their adversaries. And here is a clip that I wanted to play, just so you understand what's truly going on in Syria. Jeffrey Sachs, again, knocking out of the park, as much as I think we should question his intentions. The point is, this is easily proven. Every single thing he says in here is not just a disagreement. It is documented. You can show the receipts. You can show the UN documents. You can show even the U.S. government admitting every single part of this. And yet here we are today where the narrative has spun right back into square one. And if you think that's recognize that there's a changing of the guard right now and not, it's still all your government. I'm very convinced the left-right paradigm at the highest level is just an illusion. But the point is that when you have the change, there are things that shift, and we're watching these things shift right back into place. This is important to understand. And I'll read that afterward, actually. It's a good clip.
Barack Obama, president at the time, of course, August the 20th, 2012, talking about his red line for Assad.
We have been very clear to the Assad regime, but also to other players on the ground, that a red line for us is we start seeing a whole bunch of chemical weapons moving around or being utilized. That would change my calculus. That would change my equation.
Now, what happened is that shortly after that, that's exactly what happened.
Just real quickly, can you believe that this idiot is still completely going with the narrative of them using chemical weapons? Like, of all the stories we've had, this has been so thoroughly broken down, even by corporate media. Someone like Robert Fisk personally went there and broke down how obviously this was a lie. Or going back to the earlier point, one of the earliest of Carla Del Ponte from the UN, openly saying, no, it was the rebels that used them. And they still, to this day, point at those things and say Assad used them. We know they're lying, guys. We know as a matter of fact. I'm of the mind he probably knows that, doesn't care. I don't think Piers Morgan is even remotely honest. I think he's desperately trying to play this middle ground role right now where he actively drives the corporate, the mainstream narrative, but while acting like he's somehow dancing the fence. Now, objectivity is important, but you realize objectivity is not one thing from each side. That's the fake understanding of the corporate media. There are facts, and if the facts are 1,000 to 1, well, it's obvious what side is the truth. In this case, that's what we're talking about, and he still stands in the middle and goes, well, that's not objectivity. That's illusion of objectivity to drive a very clear narrative, which is Assad gassing children. We have to stop. What about the children?
Assad used chemical weapons, and that as a result, Obama was, by his own words, obligated to do something about it, but didn't.
And remember, these are the moderate rebels that used them, as even Carla points out, that the U.S. government was funding. And it still does, by the way, to this day.
He ducked his own red line. And it was at that moment that Vladimir Putin, who I remember, and I'm sure you do as well, suddenly wrote extraordinarily an op-ed piece in the New York Times, of all places. And then he moved in to support Assad and effectively took control as Assad's main supporter in Syria. And many people think that that was the catalyst for a lot of the problems that then followed. Is that a...
Oh, yeah, right. Totally not the illegal invasion of Syria. Totally not the murdering and framing and false flagging, if you will, of all that's going on there, or the ongoing occupation and theft of oil and wheat and food. Yeah, totally not that. Because clearly you can see Putin doing all of that, right? Oh, you can't, though, seeing as how he hasn't occupied other areas of Syria. He has ensured that Syria exists. Now, of course, you could argue there's more behind the scenes that we can't see, but the reality is what we can prove and what people on the ground like Vanessa Beeley will tell you, Assad and Syria have their sovereignty in the context of of Syria and Russia. They don't in the context of the U.S. government, pretending to fight whatever they're pointing to and breaking every single rule they claim Russia is that you can see that they're not. Or Israel occupying everywhere and murdering people any way they want. But just think about how this is not Russia good guy. I think they're all very guilty of a lot of things, but you could prove that they're lying about this. And Russia defended Syria's sovereignty against the obvious invader and did not occupy territory. So what do you call that? You call that a lie.
An accurate assessment of what happened, do you think?
Not really, although I did witness some of that close up, even at the G20 in St. Petersburg around the time of these events. What this starts, and it's really fascinating to go back, it starts in 1996 with Netanyahu, who wrote a book called Fighting Terrorism. And the thesis of the book is quite straightforward and very dangerous. He says, there's Hamas, there's Hezbollah, they oppose Israel. It's not good for us to fight them directly. That won't work. What we need to do is topple the governments that back them. So what we need is regime change throughout the Middle East. And he actually gave a long list of 7 countries that included Syria, Libya, Iraq, Iran, Somalia, Sudan, and Lebanon. And systematically, the United States has done Netanyahu's bidding for almost 30 years now, going to war with every one of them, except for the big one that Netanyahu so much longs for, which is the war directly between the United States and Iran.
Right after 9/11, about 10 days after 9/11, I went through the Pentagon and I saw Secretary Rumsfeld and Deputy Secretary Wolfowitz. I went downstairs just to say hello to some of the people on the Joint Staff who had used to work for me. And one of the generals called me and he said, "Sir, you got to come in. You got to come in and talk to me a second." I said, "Well, you're too busy." He said, "No." He says, "We've made the decision. We're going to war with Iraq." This was on or about the 20th of September. I said, "We're going to war with Iraq. Why?" He said, "I don't know." He said, "I guess they don't know what else to do."
But they laugh at that. Is so crazy.
So I said, "Well, did they find some information connecting Saddam to Al Qaeda?" He said, No. He says, "There's nothing new that way. They just made the decision to go to war with Iraq." He said, "I guess it's like we don't know what to do about terrorists, but we've got a good military and we can take down governments." And he said, "I guess if the only tool you have is a hammer, every problem has to look like a nail." So I came back to see him a few weeks later, and by that time we were bombing in Afghanistan. I said, "Are we still going to war with Iraq?" And he said, "Oh, it's worse than that." He said, he reached over on his desk, he picked up a piece of paper, and he said, I just got this down from upstairs," meaning the Secretary of Defense's office today, and he said, "This is a memo that describes how we're going to take out 7 countries in 5 years, starting with Iraq and then Syria, Lebanon, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and finishing off Iran."
Where do you think they got that from? I mean, guys, this is not a trick. It's exactly what he's highlighting. That's why he's laughing when he talks about this, because it is the most obvious thing in the world. It is transparent. But you see, the insider circles actively act like they don't know. Left and right, mind you, since they're on the same side about maintaining a very clear agenda. Now, why, of all things, Jeffrey Sachs in the last couple of months has been breaking down major, I mean, that concerns me. Partly because you wonder whether it's leading to some other thing, which is what I can't stop seeing right now. The revelation in order to get you on a certain position that then justifies the next one. And I'm worried about that. But nonetheless, as long as we're on guard about that, you have to acknowledge the importance of the truth that he's telling you. That the U.S. government has been at war with everything we're talking about for Israel. And going back to the Syria point, it's exactly what it's everything we've talked about. It's about rationalizing the next step. It's about, like what we just saw, using the moderate rebel dynamic, or rather just the rebels, they pop up and they act like they're fighting for freedom, and they rationalize the new step they want to carry out in Syria. And the point is about stopping the transfer of weapons to Hezbollah. All right. So just like he was telling you right there, we need to start. It's all about this guise of stopping what they claim is the terrorist activity. Well, what happened with Iraq? They lied to us about WMDs. What happened with every single location was a manufactured illusion that justified the killing of millions of innocent people around the world. How is that not the biggest terrorist group in the world? In fact, surprise, surprise, it is.
But the U.S. went to war with Syria in 2011. Secretly, of course, this was what's called Operation Timber Sycamore. It was Obama assigning the CIA to overthrow Assad. Overtly, the United States overthrew Muammar Gaddafi in 2011. It's interesting, Piers, to go back to 2002. This is after 9/11, of course, to watch Netanyahu as being the lead cheerleader for the U.S. to overthrow Saddam Hussein. Now we have a treasure trove of documents coming out that this was really a war on Israel's behalf. Everything about the weapons of mass destruction was phony, known to be phony inside the U.S. government, but this was the argument that was given, and Netanyahu was there in Washington telling him it'll be just great if you take out Saddam Hussein. It's going to topple all the rest of the governments. The idea was, incidentally, that Saddam would be toppled and then the U.S. military would go right into Syria right away. But then an insurgency trapped the United States inside Iraq so that the Syrian war was actually delayed 8 years.
And you can thank in part Russia for that. Okay, so if you understand the reality, now this isn't, you could argue that it wasn't because Russia thought it was in that they were just altruistically fighting for the interests of Syria. But some would argue that, and you shouldn't disregard that possibility. I'm just much more jaded when it comes to the interest of governments, but obviously that's possible. But you can see an interest, even if it's self-preservation, to stop in regard to what they knew was coming with Ukraine and the rest of it, and the Middle East in general. or there's a larger agenda between Russia and Israel and whatever's coming next. The point, though, is that facts still matter. And in all of this, whatever their intention is, it's always important to decouple those two things. They obviously overlap, but you need to be able to acknowledge the facts of the situation before you necessarily jump to why they did it. Because that's always the case. Well, why would they do that? Well, we don't know yet, but we can prove that it did, and we can prove how and why. Or I guess not the why, but you can prove the facts of how it went down. Right. And this is a very important thing to consider. So I think what we're seeing in general is that the lines all draw back to very clear entities. And it's not just Zionism, but obviously we can see a central part of this. Now, why this doesn't get discussed, even though you can draw the dots connect perfectly. And it is factually exactly what happened.
But what we're watching is this crazy Netanyahu idea of regional war so that Israel can have its greater Israel, as they call it. In other words,
the occupying other people's territory is what that is. Jordan, Syria, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, greater Israel is very clear, and it's not a secret. They have patches on their arms right now while they're destroying Gaza's territory and ethnically cleansing people and committing genocide. It shows you that they're guilty of exactly what they claim Hamas or Russia are trying to do, which is go after other people's territory next. And meanwhile, their chief ally, the U.S. government, is occupying more territory illegally than anybody else in the world. But we'll pretend it's only the hypothetical you can't prove.
Everything is to stop the Palestinian cause, and the U.S. keeps being involved in these wars. And there was Jake Sullivan again today explaining, terrorists. Who cares about terrorists? We're toppling Assad. And this is again for the Israel lobby, basically.
But look, you're blaming Israel for all of it, and fine, that's your view. Many people would say, no, it's
I'm blaming Netanyahu in particular.
It ends right there. But don't you love that? You're blaming Israel. Well, no, he very carefully and soundly laid out facts that point to Israel. Now, you want to call that blaming Israel? That makes the exact point that he has an interest in deviating, sidestepping, distracting, obfuscating anything that shows that Israel's the culprit. And you don't think that's clear? Watch what he does. It's so transparent. Now, while I will give him credit for the fact that he does throw bones more than anybody else, and I think that's an agenda, but I could be wrong. Maybe he just is that blind. That would make sense to me. My point is he does highlight some things in his show lately that is more than most, only in certain categories, and I argue in places that we already see it. Now, this is a point we always have to consider. There are things that we know are the most verifiable, like, for example, chemical weapons and Assad, that like at some point they could throw that out as some bombshell admission, even because they know we all know it already. Like the WMDs didn't exist in Iraq. Like the point is there are levels where they still pretend that's not true. So, but they could come out with this big bombshell and say, well, now we know. And Pierce Morgan would finally act like it, but they deny it up until then. My point is they know you already know. And so they use that as leverage or, release valve. This is how the world works, guys. And we have to be real about it. So lastly, I just had to call this idiot. This guy, the ones right now that are standing up there day after day and just talking you down for pointing out what everybody can see, special place in hell. Matt Miller, Patel, the rest of them, pretty much all of them, in my opinion. But Matt Miller says the United States, this is on the 4th, is concerned by evidence suggesting foreign interference influenced the fairness of Romania's electoral process. Can you even imagine them coming out and saying that right now? Talk about tone deaf, out of touch, or desperate and not caring. There is nobody on this planet that interferes in more electoral processes than the U.S. and Israel. It's not up for debate. On top of that, and I wouldn't say, of course, I would even argue likely that somebody else is doing this. But for them to stand up and make this point about somehow you have this moral standing to call out what you think, what you haven't even proven, evidence suggesting interference. Are you kidding me? That's a political move. And we all know that. That's the thing, is I think most people are aware of this other than, anyway, the point is that it's just that lazy. I don't think they know what else to do, but keep walking the steps. We are the moral, righteous, freedom-saving person, and we're all laughing at them. But it says, Romanians' leaders in future are for Romanians to choose, free of external manipulation aimed at impinging. It worked, but I feel like he just meant something else on their democratic process. Infringing, again, but anyway, have the right to choose. without external manipulation. Well, gee, that would be great what about Hamas? What about Palestine? Which, by the way, tomorrow we're going to get into information which we've already shared on TLAV a long time ago, which is the information about the leak tape that shows Hillary Clinton saying that they should rig that election. Now, the reason that I haven't brought that up in the past is because you can't prove that it happened from that. Only that Clinton suggested they should, or in retrospect was like, well, we should have rigged it. Either way, it's important because the 2006 election, how often have I pointed that out? I do not believe they would have let that just happen, even though they went back on it afterward. I think it was designed to use it to say, see, that's who they picked. They're all terrorists, which is where we are. My point, though, is that what about Bolivia, right? What about Venezuela? All you do is go after people you don't like and act like they cheated somehow, even though you cheat every possible second in everything you're doing. I just think it's just sad. And I said, these clowns just going through the motions, acting like we don't see exactly what they are. The U.S. Gov has no moral authority and cheats at whatever it's doing more than the next three combined. Righteous and superior is just not working anymore, if it ever truly did. Now, to be clear, this is not an attack on the country. It's an attack on the government that pretends to represent the country. You are the country. Now, they, as in their citizen capacity, are also part of the country. But when they become part of the government, when they're acting as the government, they are not. They are a separate thing. They are people that are supposed to be working for you. Now, that's important to understand that these people are supposed to be acting out your will. We know that's not how this works. So when they stand up and pretend like they've got some moral authority, it behooves us. It is our responsibility as Americans to stand up and say they're not telling you the truth. They do not represent us. It's the only way we're going to get past this. Now, let's talk about dioxins in Georgia, Conyers, Georgia, and East Palestine for that matter, and anywhere else. This story is important to follow up on. Now, I do have one quick, basically that in passing was discussing Scott C. Smith, that he's got the earliest results back from the dioxin part of it. And as he said, and I've reported already from my personal conversations with him, he was of the mind that this has potential to be the largest dioxin release in history. Now, he's saying he is seeing more from the earliest reports that he's ever seen. And I'll play it for you. But I'll give you this to read and make sure you catch up on this if you're not even familiar with it, because it is an important story. Now, honestly, my true opinion about this, which I shouldn't even say that, I'm almost honest with you, and I'm always giving my true opinion. But the point is that this objectively is one of the largest stories we could talk about today, but weirdly is getting very little attention. It's because it is abstract. As one of the women say in these clips, chemical exposure is invisible for the most part, that you just don't see it, and it gets easy to ignore, and they know that, and they play into it. Dioxin, TCD specifically, TCDD, is the most dangerous substance on the planet, according to every expert. And this is what we're dealing with here. And it is released, and arguably the most we've ever seen. As I said before, the Seveso disaster from Italy in 1979, which was a dioxin release, in exactly the same way, mind you, a chemical reaction, was considered, and is still to this day considered to be one of the top 10 environmental disasters in history. And I argue, based on the data we've seen, and I've went over it in depth in this show, is objectively smaller than what we just saw. And arguably, even East Palestine, that was much more difficult to read for a lot of reasons. I'll talk about it in a second. Murder by malfeasance. This was a general conversation about the risk of dioxins and contamination, but also a focal point on these locations. As I wrote the dioxin contamination and the ongoing cover-up. I just really can't stress enough how important this is about the reality of why the EPA refuses to point these things out, refuses to even use the word dioxin. In my mind, they are 100% aware this is an overwhelming problem they don't know what to do with, or they made it this way for clear nefarious intentions. I'm more of leaning towards the former. I think this is about the reality that this has gotten so far out of control because of their malfeasance or just irresponsibility. But now it's at a point where they don't know how to deal with it. They don't know how to get rid of it. They can't burn it. I've gone over this extensively. They don't know how to get rid of the dioxin in general. And so they're going to stand up and say, you're all being poisoned right now because of what we've done or haven't done, and yet we don't know how to solve it. Why would they report that? See my point? Now, an honest person probably would, but we're not dealing with honest people. So the point is, make sure you realize that like glyphosate, like PFAS, like a lot of these things, it's a very real problem, and dioxins are far, 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 far more dangerous and are, I guarantee you, affecting your life right now. Based on what we can see, based on the information, not just in these locations. We know the East Palestine, the risk, it went 16 states across. 16 states, if I can actually see if that'll pop up. Yeah, look at that. Boom. And this is what's so crazy about this. This is 5 months old. We were screaming about how far this went right in the beginning. Now, again, just like with, I'm not psychic. I'm not even more educated on these topics than some of the other people in this conversation. I simply just looked at it with an objective view and showed what the facts did, which was it was clear. This was a huge problem that went way beyond a 1 mile radius around the area. And yet EPA maintained that forever. How is it possible that Ryan Cristian was able to see more than the EPA? Because it was obvious. And so many people just go along with what they're told. In this case, we now know 16 states is how far this went, which means the dioxin release went that far. Scott is back. This is the reality, guys. And as we've shown before, the reality of how far it can go, the study specifically from the Arctic shows that in North America, there are many, many dioxin sources. And this study proves from 2000, year 2000, that from North American sources, there are families in Arctic Canada who don't have any source of within 200 miles of dioxin that have dangerous levels of dioxin in their breast milk because of the sources in North America. Ask yourself how bad that would be for the person that lives next to that plant. Is it amazing that we don't talk about these things? Still going. No one has done anything about this. So on that note, let's talk about the current situation. That's just me trying to do my best to give you a quick breakdown of how crazy this story is, and still probably won't go anywhere because of algorithmic censorship that we continue to deal with. But watch this show. Get it in front of people. And I'll include the new ones about Georgia. Could be the greatest dioxin disaster in history. That's quoting Scott. As well as his data showed that the risk is 6 times greater than what he saw in East Palestine. So, the stat, and by the way, as I've said before, plenty of criticisms about specifically status quo and Jordan himself, but good on him for continuing to break down this story. I don't see anybody else talking about this, and I'm sure they are, but good on Jordan for staying with this because I think this is monumentally important. So here's a clip I'll play for you, just really to get to the point of seeing Scott say this, but also hearing Jordan report that what he's hearing from individuals on the ground. Because, I mean, obviously they've got a much larger budget and they're able to do a lot of these different people on the ground covering all these things. And so they're getting real-time information about the people in Conyers. It's important to hear.
I'll just share a comment I got from a resident in Conyers. This was the other day about how bad the health symptoms are for a lot.
And this is new, by the way. This is not some 3-week-old video, right? These people are suffering this right now.
A lot of people there. I still have a lot of shortness of breath, mucus buildup, headaches, dizziness, passing out, tired, more achy, sweaty, then freezing, burns on my hand and sides of mouth, hand tremors, trouble sleeping.
See, this is really important. So obviously passing out, can you imagine pretending like that's not a serious issue after all of this is dissipated? That's a dioxin problem, guys. Anything else would be a real-time, you'd be lit. The point is, as if you're smelling chemicals, you're dealing with chemical exposure. So that's the earliest part where I can still smell these things. Now we're at a point where this is, for the most part, visually via smell has dissipated. And if you're still feeling lightheaded, passing out, feeling sick, guys, that's a very real problem. And then, as he just mentioned, burns, they're talking about chloracne. They're talking about rashes. And we keep showing you this. That is acute exposure. That is the main thing the Seveso research showed, that the chloracne, which is what it's called, is a response to either chlorine or specifically dioxin, is indicative of acute exposure, dangerous high-level exposure, which then the study goes on to show 40 years later, reproductive issues, immune system problems. I mean, unreal stuff. And here we are. This is now. And apparently someone in the chat saying he just did a live about this. I mean, this is all real-time information.
Sleeping,
so good on him.
Worse anxiety, hearing loss, vision issues, eye pain, fast pulse, blood pressure spikes, itching, hair loss, puffy face, peeling hands.
How is nobody talking about this? Now, again, there's so much going on in the world, but this is such a even just the fact that they're like East Palestine, it seemed like every partisan person in the world was screaming about this, trying to get, they're grifting on the ground, trying to sell things. I mean, that's how it always happens. You know what that almost tells me? It's my opinion that there's something real going on here, more so than we've seen in the past, to where they're like, it's a blackout. I'm not seeing anybody talk about this. This is like a grifting gold mine for some of these people that would normally be doing this. As I've said, the same from the Hainas, the Nick Sorters, whoever out there juffing in and trying to be like, we're there to save everybody, and they get caught grifting. Why are they not doing it here? I think that says something. It's just an opinion, and it's a subjective observation, but think about that. These people are this far after this story, months later are dealing with this. I mean, that's wild.
This person said, I know people all over the area having similar issues, some worse than others. Some have had to move permanently already.
Elected officials were noticeably absent from the Q&A style panel discussion that featured East Palestine, Ohio residents.
Scott results in.
Before you hear Scott, now that really quickly went over that. This is the same thing every time. You know why that there's no officials, nobody from the company? Because they don't have to, because nobody's caring or paying attention, and so they have no pressure. At least on East Palestine, they got driven because people were screaming about it. People were highlighting. Even corporate media was talking about it. And so they were kind of driven to have to stand up, even though they dragged their feet every time they could. So right now, how are you going to tell me that there's nobody there representing? So the people are having their own discussion? Yes, because nobody cares. Because I'm of the mind that this is not just the company, that there's a government problem here. And don't forget, the supervisor from the government who spoke about this right afterward died after he walked out of that building. Could be a coincidence, but it's hard to think with everything we're seeing that it was just a random overlap. He was having shortness of breath while he was speaking. I'm of the mind that it could have just been acute, very high exposure because he was investigating.
And today, dioxins, and to put it in context, it's the highest level of dioxins that I have seen. It's the highest level of dioxins that I have seen.
Think about that. This man has been investigating chemical exposure his whole career, has specifically gone over these around East Palestine and plenty of others. He's got a very prominent background. Look at his record. He's been breaking these things down. And at East Palestine, he was one of the many along Texas A&M, and I forget the other guy's name. Was it Hesher? I forget. I think Stephen, I forget his name. But the point is that they all found the same results. Shockingly high levels of dioxins, and they still don't tell you that. So now he's telling you preliminary results around dioxins are showing he's higher than he's ever seen. That should be shocking. That should be news across the United States.
The highest level of dioxins that I have seen. And that is Scott Smith, independent tester, who has tested in East Palestine, Ohio, over 30 times. And by the way, dioxins, as we've covered, there's, I believe, over 70 kinds, and several of them are the most toxic substances known to man.
And TCDD is what we're dealing with. Scott told me that explicitly, and I've shown you this on the show, both in East Palestine and here. Why? Because we're dealing with the combustion and incomplete combustion of chlorinated products. In this case, specifically chlorine, which, as I've shown you the peer-reviewed study, chlorine is the make or break point for TCDD. The more chlorine, the more it is capable of making this as a byproduct. So here, when we have plastic pallets full of chlorine that burned along with everything else, as he points out, this is a perfect storm for dioxin release.
We're here because accountability has not taken place in the way that it should have taken place. We're here because our elected officials did not take the necessary steps initially.
By the way, this plant, BioLab, which the community is now trying to shut down, has had 2 other fires.
3, actually.
Beyond this one in the last decade. Yet,
which we've told you,
somehow their business license wasn't revoked.
Exactly. Which, again, is just no way you can't see that there's something going on there. Because remember, the main point we've talked about, right? Which is that ultimately they have a sprinkler system that is over chemicals that react to water. And this is the same thing that's happened 3 other times. I went over this extensively on their own reports. That all those shows are linked. You can watch them for yourself. And so, as even Terry, I believe was his name. I don't want to. I should have had it on the supervisor that passed away. I'm just mad that I don't remember his name. The point is that he said in that discussion, very clearly suggested this was possibly by design, that this was a fire that he's seen before, and that whether it's an insurance scam or something far darker. I also showed you the video of the creek that's near there with like bubbling green water coming out of this thing. There's so much more going on around this, and I don't think anybody wants to actually find out that there's something going on about how this keeps happening. And people are suffering because of it. I mean, you can show the results around these areas, multiple examples, and yet they just still continue to do business. I mean, this seems like a cutout almost for something else. It's hard to see that there's something more going on here. Now, here is Breaking Points speaking with Jordan. And I just want to highlight this. This kind of stuff drives me crazy because if there was a genuine, not restricted, algorithmic controlled flow of information, these things should be everywhere. Now, this is a slightly different one, but this is saying exclusive audio. EPA official admits Norfolk Southern misled Ohio and Pennsylvania residents that air was safe. Now, it's one point is about the safe air, but realize the point that I've been stressing, that's why I want to make sure we saw again. Oh, and here is the, I wanted to show you this. This is, okay, well, actually, let's do this first since this part we're going to get into, this Norfolk lied point. I just think it's a bombshell. I can't, but it's even in corporate media and nobody will talk about this. But so the reason I want to reiterate that is so you can see that it's not just some passing point that it's very easy to prove. But first, this blows my mind. So Jordan's talking about dioxins. Like he's been very clearly talking about this. Yet when he goes on Breaking Points, specifically talking about the EPA cover-up in East Palestine around what happened, which is dioxins. And he's pointing, that's the problem, right? When you highlight what happened in East Palestine or in Conyers, Georgia, the conversation's about dioxins. There are other problematic issues, but there's nothing that was more dangerous than that part in this conversation. By far. So when he has this conversation with her, whether by her design or by their own self-censorship, there's no mention of dioxins in the whole interview. How do you make sense of that? How do you have this? I mean, look, cut to the chase. I am convinced that at some level, you're not supposed to talk about this. The dioxin is a word that you're not supposed to say at certain levels. Why that wouldn't be brought up or why they cut it out? Because I find it hard to believe that Jordan wouldn't make that statement. That's everything he talks about. You watch his videos, when he's talking about either of these conversations, dioxins are the focal point. Yet he goes on the show. And the reason I'm showing you here for the podcast is dioxin. Let's see the transcript. It's nowhere in the entire video. I find that to be absolutely mind-blowing and revealing. Now, in the video as well, they mentioned the EPA if leaked audio that they misled people. Well, yeah, I really wish this would have been something we talked about a long time ago. Not only that the air was bad, as we should all know by now, but that they lied about the reason it got bad. Here's the show we did back in July 19th, 2023. The investigation found that East Palestine and the supposed controlled burn, which is by definition not a controlled burn. There was no controlled flow of oxygen. That's why you got all the black smoke, which proves that this was a not controlled burn, which has maximized the problem, mind you. They found that it was unnecessary and that Norfolk lied. Here's the point. I've referenced that many times. This is directly from that conversation. This is from June 23rd, 2023. The title is Decision to Burn Chemicals After Ohio Derailment Under Scrutiny at the Hearing. So again, we're in a court hearing. Here's what it says. The tanks did not breach and pressure release devices worked, he said. Now we're talking about specifically Paul Thomas, vice president for the manufacturer Oxy Vinyls, who was an advisor for Norfolk Southern in this context. And it says, vinyl chloride, when exposed to heat, can undergo a rapid polymerization reaction that can cause an explosion. That's what they all reference, right? That's what we're worried about. Thomas, said the company spoke to Norfolk Southern and its emergency response contractors after the derailment. Quote, we made it clear, based on our expertise of the chemical properties of our product, that stabilized vinyl chloride would be unlikely to spontaneously explode. Polymerize being the quote. That's a very big thing to point out. Then it says, he said, Oxy Vinyls did not have real-time information from the site, and we did not participate in the decision to burn it. He's very clearly trying to make sure that I didn't tell, because that was, if you, like I said many times, if you sat back and tried to devise a way to make this the biggest possible disaster, you could not have done better than this. And of course, recognizing that Keith Drabick, who was the chief of East Palestine's volunteer fire department, made the final decision. And in other reports we've shown you, he feels like he was railroaded, no pun intended. He was clearly manipulated. And that's why I highlighted as they lied. He knew it was treated vinyl chloride, according to his advisors, and he didn't tell them that, and then pressured them to get this decision done. So how do you not read that as they wanted this to explode, or that if they did so, it would benefit them financially, which is where we can see today. It seems that they made out better than they did not suffer. In fact, it seems they benefited from the whole process. It's easy to look up. So I think that's really important to understand. So back in the context of this, we can recognize how easy it is to mislead all of this. And yes, the EPA lied, not just about how bad the air was, but they've all withheld this information. And still to this day, this doesn't come out. Other than in this writing from corporate media, my point is if you discuss these things, you do not get the dioxin conversation. You do not get the point that they knowingly withheld information that it would not explode, which was the primary reason it all happened. I think there's more to this story. I think it's quite obvious. Now, this was just one of the many articles from March 18th, 2023. Dioxins in East Palestine, hundreds of times greater than safe level. That's independent testing, mind you, and they still were not talking about it. And still to this day, do not say the word dioxin. Now, this is a new one in Conyers, Georgia from November 24th. U.S. Chemical Safety Board releases findings on Georgia lab chemical release. Can you take a shot in the dark what word they don't use? Not a single mention of dioxin. This is my point. Now you realize they're not pointing to it, but they're at some level, people like Scott are there. He's asking them about that. They know what he's testing for. Not a word. It's important to recognize how important that is. They know what they're hiding. How do you think they're going to ignore the most dangerous chemical in existence? Which, by the way, is simple. It's anybody knows if in these fields, EPA, if chlorine is burned, there will be dioxins. They know this. It is 1 + 1 = 2. And they don't ever mention it. Here's what the article says. It says, the safety board said the main substance involved were a collection of chemicals that are commonly used for cleaning and disinfecting. And they go on to list a bunch of things, not even really mentioning specifically chlorine. And it says these chemicals were stored in the plant's warehouse and generated heat, eventually leading to their breakdown and resulting in the release of toxic vapors and fires, the CSB said. The resulting massive plumes of toxic smoke contained chlorine and other hazardous substances. That's where they get away with it because they can just pretend, oh, that was included there, and cause significant offsite impacts. That's like, I mean, talk about burying the lead, right? You're talking about the most dangerous chemical and including that in other hazardous substances. It says the operator of KIK Consumer Products runs the BioLab facility in Conyers, which makes Clorox branded pool cleaning products made with chlorine. And this is chlorine in the context of this conversation. Not just the other side products, but specifically chlorine that burned. The CSB said the incident began around 5 a.m. when a BioLab employee on fire watch heard a popping sound in one of the warehouses. Yeah, interesting how they have had 3 fires in the past and they need a fire watch person who still did not stop what happened. Maybe it's because they've got water sprinklers over something that would blow up with water. Sounds like an obvious decision, not an accident. This is eventually the employee called 911 because large hazardous plumes of vapors had been released inside the warehouse. By 6:30 a.m., flames became visible above the area of the chemical reaction and were quickly extinguished, in less than 2 hours. Adding that another fire broke out shortly before 12:30 p.m. and was eventually extinguished at 4 p.m. The fires completely destroyed the warehouse. So how do you reconcile that with what this guy said? So here he's popping sounds. Then he tells you he sees the toxic plumes of vapors, which apparently only started the reports were showing after the second explosion. So these things seem to be inconsistent, I would argue. Then it goes on to say, the EPA found elevated chlorine and hydrogen chloride levels during air monitoring, maybe because they're not monitoring for anything else. The agency continued monitoring the air until October 17th, when guess what? It detected low levels of chlorine. So just like East Palestine, they test for VOCs, and when they find them, they don't find them, they go, well, you're all safe, go back home. But they're not, though, because they're not testing for what we now know was the problem that went 16 states across. You think that's an accident? Guys, this is criminal what they're doing. The agency continued monitoring until October 17th when they found low chlorine. So the chlorine, not the byproduct of chlorine that is more dangerous than anything else in the conversation, once they saw the chlorine go down, they said it was fine. They know it's not. Somebody in this conversation knows that it's not and did it anyway. The CSB's investigation into the incident is ongoing as it continues to look at the cause of the chemicals' decomposition, the storage and handling of these chemicals, as well as industry guidance for fire safety concerns. I mean, come on, how stupid this is. 3 times the same thing happens, this being the 4th, and suddenly we're going to investigate whether or not, whether they went through the same motions and didn't change anything from the first time it happened. Nobody seems to go to jail. It's like we often get these little glimpses into what I think is the dark reality of what's going on everywhere else. We live in this fantasy world, what we think the world is like, and it can be. But because of our complacency and our apathy, we've let them take control. The board will provide its findings and recommends in final investigation, blah, blah, blah. Here's what CNN said. Investigators release update. Same report, some additional points. It says the biolab officials told the investigators that they have established a permanent fire watch 2 or 3 months prior. Why? So we get a time frame now. So 2 or 3 months before they established a permanent fire watch and then boom, fire breaks out. That seems pretty counterintuitive. Seems like that was put out there to justify that so we were being careful and then it happened anyway. Well, why would you see my point? They've had fires before. Why wouldn't they always have a fire watch? 3 months before? Guys, just everything about this seems to lean into, like the guy was telling us, this seems deliberate. Prior to the incident, after strong odors from oxidizers in 2 storage buildings were detected, according to their report. BioLab also told CSB that 2 employers were on duty for fire watch on September 29th. 2 of them. The warehouse was caught fire containing 99% TCCA, and we went over that as well, by the way, which also causes dioxin release. We already talked about it. Used to make chlorinated tablets to control bacteria and algae. That's why. And another acid, DCCA, which is used to make swimming pool stock. Same point. A treatment used to help break down contaminants. When TCCA touches a small amount of water, it doesn't dissolve. It can experience a chemical reaction. So they all stood by, were on fire watch to make sure they could stop the sprinklers that would cause, it's just redundant. It's embarrassing we pretend like this is not something they let happen, which in turn produces toxic chlorine gas. No, guys, it produces dioxins. See, this is my point. Now, yes, as my research showed, there is a difference. There is a chlorine gas that is used as a weapon, not the same as dioxin. But when you're talking about this, it's not the same thing. Chlorine being released out of a container is not chlorine gas. I mean, technically, you could argue it's a vapor of chlorine, but when you say chlorine gas, we're talking about a weapon. In this case, they're using chlorine gas, I argue, to hide the word dioxin, which is not the same thing. It's crazy. And it says the fire was put out by 8:10, but around noon, another fire erupted. The second fire produced thick black smoke, and see, that's my point. That's where the vapors came out, prompting evacuations of the area and on and on. It says the biolab has a strong track record of working constructively with regulatory agencies, they're claiming, and will continue to cooperate with their investigation. That's just the boilerplate. Our top priority is and has always been the health and safety of the community. Not a single person seems to think that in the community because it's just not true. And we worked collaboratively with first responders and local, state, and federal authorities to successfully remediate the situation. No, they really did not seem to do that at all. In fact, they seem to be hiding from the reality of what it actually released. For days, shifting winds swept the chemical haze back and forth in multiple cities, including parts of Atlanta, 30 miles away. Yeah, there you go. You know you're in this path, guys. This release, dioxin, just like the looking back at East Palestine that went 16 states across, you should be aware of what this is causing. CNN spoke with Conyers residents who said they still have blurry vision, shortness of breath, throat irritation, chronic headaches. Same thing. Chlorine and hydrogen chlorine were detected at high concentrations for several days. This is my point. That if you have a residual high level of just that as what didn't burn off, you know that a lot of this burned, and they know that too. The EPA discontinued its monitoring on the 17th for what we already told you. Now, Stacy Maduke Hopkins points an interesting point about this out. Inmates apparently at a local jail were right across the street. No one even cared to move them. I just think it's important to point out these are human beings. Half of them are there on nonviolent drug charges, is what the general statistic tends to be. But I mean, just think about how crazy that is. So you technically did order evacuation orders, but you didn't care to move these people who are right in line. I just think that's wild. It just shows you that this is all feigned, in my opinion, that they don't really care about you. It shouldn't be too hard of a sell. Now, here's a local report. This is from the 3rd. Saying that they demand justice. The people of the county, the people of the local area, they've been fighting this for a long time, by the way. There's been ongoing, what's the word I'm looking for? Petitions. It's wild. So at least they're getting a little bit more attention, which I do think is giving them some traction. But it's wild how little attention this is getting when I think this is one of the largest stories going on.
And to listen at that forum, what are some of the concerns that are still being expressed tonight?
Well, Jennifer, the main concern is BioLab rebuilding in this very same spot where we saw a plume of chemical smoke erupting just months ago. But not only that, some people concerned for their health, others just don't know where to turn next.
I mean, think about the fact that you had that many fires already in the exact same way, and you're going to just rebuild for the fourth time and you start all over again. I mean, guys, that's like, you know, the whole classic definition of insanity, right? This is, you're going to get why would you expect something different? I don't know how you can at least consider that that might not be some overlapping government agenda. How would they, or at least somebody who's corrupt, who's allowing it to continue for whatever reason?
Message is simple.
We've asked, we've pleaded.
We don't want it built.
We want BioLab shut down.
The Conyers community left frustrated and upset months after a chemical fire sent this plume into the sky in September.
Do we really want that kind of neighbor? Do we really want that kind of business in Rockdale County when the danger outweighs the benefit?
A call for a BioLab shutdown isn't the only demand.
Business license itself be revoked.
This after homeowners were left wondering if they should stay. Businesses moved out of Rockdale County and dozens were sent to the hospital.
They diagnosed me with chemical inhalation and lung damage.
Like many.
So make sure you didn't miss that. Really quickly brushing over. They diagnosed her with chemical exposure and lung damage. You want to tell me that that's going to happen from some chlorine exposure in a short period of time? I mean, those things definitely added to this, and whatever other byproduct releases or chemicals that were released, yes. But what we're seeing, I think, is very clearly about, you know, the most dangerous chemical in existence and the effects. I mean, the acute effects. The worst issue, I think, over time is what will happen. You know, you go 10 years from now and are riddled with cancer. Nobody is going to point to this. In fact, and you try to, I mean, I would argue literally impossible to make a case about why that's their fault. They know this. Somebody out there is very aware of how this works.
Portia Miller wondering what her lasting health effects will be.
The only way to fight this is for all the fighters to get together.
Jamie Wallace and her family victims of this plume in East Palestine, Ohio, after a Norfolk Southern train derailed in 2023.
I grew up there my whole entire life. It'll never be.
Don't forget, in East Palestine specifically, it was the conjunction of two actions from either side of the paradigm that allowed this to be possible. During Trump's administration, there was clear restrictions on certain things that led to this, and Biden's in regard to the union aspect. Just as always, guys, whether that was by design or not, it's always like that. I think it's important that we always recognize that it's the partisan game is a way to make you only look at one side of the story, which will always allow them to never be held accountable. Like that, you don't ever address the full picture, you're never going to get full accountability.
Home again.
She's in Conyers to show people what they've learned.
Chemical contamination you can't see. It looks normal. You can't see that hurricane that's still over us as we're still being exposed.
That's why these people will keep fighting to get BioLab out.
If you really care for the people, just leave.
Meanwhile, they're standing up and saying how they care about the community and the community supports them, you know, just all politics.
Now, the residents here in Rockdale County are asking the Rockdale County Commission to strip BioLab's business license by the end of the week. I'll tell you what really resonated here was the advice from these two women from East Palestine, Ohio, that were affected. They, again, urging everyone to document everything, make sure that they ask questions until they get the answers that they need, and, of course, to support one another. We're live tonight in Rockdale County. Angelina Salcio, 11 Alive News.
Yeah, Angelina, certainly some strong feelings and some very serious concerns. Thank you.
And then just lastly on this segment before we get into the conversation of the methane suppressant, which is, you know, I'm sure you can tell is all in the kind of same vein of conversation. This is just an important point to make, and this is just the broad part of this. I'm not trying to be such a pessimist, but realize that it is where we are today, and that this is the way these things work. And if you want to see anybody out there right now that is more immersed with military contractors and different things, it's the current administration. Warren writes, corporate greed is DuPont making $1.62 billion in profits this year, spending $1 billion on stock buybacks, paying its CEO $20 million, and being fined just $480,000 for the release of a chemical that causes leukemia. Oh, by the way, DuPont being the famously guilty part in the conversation of Teflon. knowingly hiding that and never got really held accountable for it. The company still exists. They're still wildly profitable. The point is that they knew what they were doing. There's a movie made about it, for crying out loud. Pregnant women on the line. I mean, the point is the movie only goes into a fraction of what really happened. But at the end of the day, they knew what they were doing. They knew what their product was doing to people, and they covered it up. In fact, there was the point, in at least the movie they highlight, is the idea of all the pregnant women and innocent people on the line that they knew they were affecting. Long-term, birth defects and on and on and on. And here they are with the same, just slap on the wrist. $480,000. They made that in the time it took them to write that check. It cost $508,250 to treat one kid with leukemia in America. And they didn't even get fined that much. Lewis Phillips says, DuPont plant in Louisiana fined $480,000 for release of a cancer-causing chemical. See my point, guys? I mean, they know what they're doing. Just whether it's the small biolab discussion in the context of everything else, it's, not small, but, or a DuPont level idea, or Wells Fargo for that matter. They factor in the cost. So good. So we'll just keep breaking the law. If all it's going to cost me is $500,000, we're going to earmark that for possible effects and keep breaking the law. Wells Fargo has shown that explicitly, where they keep doing the same things. And Trump was all proud of the largest fine we've given him for $1 million? I don't even know. The point is, they made that much. I mean, when they're making 10 times that in a year, it's just incredible how obvious it always continues to be. So I agree. That is disgusting. And it's not going to change, whether it's Biden or Trump. Because both of them continue it. But to be clear, Trump is very much in the mindset of big business. Every single thing we're looking at today is the opposite of being an outsider or fighting the system. Hopefully we can see how obvious that is too. Now, in the context of the larger agenda, which I think is important, as Whitney's pointed out and plenty of others, there's many people right now in current administration of Trump's administration that are in line with the Republican climate change movement. This is not a partisan game. And even then, I don't even believe most of them are in it for the narrative they're spinning. It's about the objective that's used to cover. So when we talk about this conversation, whether you think that this is a Democrat objective or whatever else, the point is this is about the Great Reset direction. This is about the Sustainable Development Goals, which if you have yet to identify, everything they're doing with the administration are checking all those boxes in different flavors, but still the same thing. Especially with the inclusion of Elon Musk, who's just a walking Great Reset, in his own special AI good guy way, but it's the same direction. So I wanted to highlight first that we already talked about this a while ago. At this point, it was about ZELP, which, if I remember correctly, is in fact something that Gates is supporting. The point today is that despite that being a common point, which I guarantee he supports it in a general sense, it does not appear that he's financially supporting the one we're going to talk about. Just these facts are important to highlight. But this was one that we recently talked about. It's called ZELP, Developing and Scaling Technology to Help Create a Sustainable Future for Agriculture. Now, there's multiple things we talked about. Ones were actual technological things that they put on their face, which is just crazy. And others were actual put in the food that would suppress the methane, which, by the way, not only is that not something we should be concerned about, it turns out there's actually a process that's a part of that is something we want. Either way, like everything else on this conversation, yes, the humanity is hurting this planet by and large because of the government's pretending they're fighting what we're doing. They're the chief responsible agents of hurting this planet. Burn pits and whatever else they're doing. It is not about the danger of climate change and carbon reduction. That's all a ploy. And it's easy to prove scientifically. But yes, we are still destroying this planet. So it's important to make sure you see both of those things. For example, they keep pointing to the word sustainability, and that started to scare people away from what that word means. The truth is we should want sustainability. What they're pointing to when they say it is not sustainability. It's a way to get you to, in fact, to not do it. You see what I'm saying? They point to it, and then it makes that word become dangerous, even though it's not. It's what they're doing behind that word. Sustainability is a good thing. In any case, this was what we talked about then. One of the tweets we shared at the time, Critical Sway, says the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation just announced a $4.7 million grant for a company that sells face masks for cows. How dumb is that? I mean, just is the stupidest thing in the world. And it is real. I talked about it. Here's the actual Gates Foundation grant for, the document for it. And it just goes over here. That's ZELP. That was what I was showing you. And we're living in ridiculous times. I agree. And this is Dr. Vandana Shiva simply saying Gates is so wrong. His point is that basically cows are the enemy and artificial meat is the better way to go. Clearly, interesting how the bad thing is what it seems to be undermining the thing he's investing in. How interesting. But she writes, cows are not the problem. The methane they emit is part of a biogenic cycle. Lab meat that he is proposing will increase demand of land for feedstock 5-fold. And we've already talked about this. And will increase emissions 25 times. It's like everything else. Now realize that there are, like taking something like green energy, windmills or whatever else. Like there is a realm in which that might benefit somebody. But to argue, one, that we should rush into it now when you've already proven that at scale, it doesn't currently work. But on top of that in many cases, it's just an illusion in general. My point, though, is that if somebody wants to build that or a business wants to use them or a government wants to decide, it's still something out there that might help. Solar panels, for example, have all kinds of uses. So you see, my point is we tend to kind of broad stroke and say, oh, that's all bad. And yes, I agree with the direction of the government and the larger agenda. My point in saying this is that you can see that what they're doing to solve what I argue is not even actually a problem is actually causing that problem to get worse. Now, that's not breaking news to any of you, but realize just the dynamic is important to see that it's, in fact, using it to drive you, in some cases, the reflexive dismissal or you deciding to push away from it, right? It's because they point to sustainability. And we go, no, that's a bad thing. That is in and of itself part of that agenda to get you to not be sustainable in the way that we should be. Same kind of thing here. I think that's interesting. So they're well, actually not the exact same thing here, but simply the case that their solution is in fact far more dangerous. It's interesting. Now we've already talked about this. Here's just the clip that Brock made for it. The FDA approves lab-grown meat. And it's a good clip because it's terrifying. I mean, this is cancer in a bottle. I mean, it's crazy how dangerous it is. And then even the same point, speaking about scale, when you actually break this down and realize they're shifting away from sterile labs because they're too expensive, and that opens up a door for the most horrifying part of this, the dangers of toxins and grown bacteria and different things that they can't control outside of a very sterile environment. But you realize in like a livestock area where they the disgusting reality of how they kill the cows and fabricate the meat, which a slaughterhouse, if you've never seen one, I recommend it's the worst thing you ever seen in your life. Worth seeing and understand the reality of it and maybe why you shouldn't support this stuff. But the point is that that's what they're used to. And if you've been in there, they're horrifying. Blood everywhere. It's disgusting. It's hardly sterile. I mean, it is in the sense that as it has to be, but ultimately it is very disgusting. And that's what that's what they're arguing in this conversation we have to get to, is that back to that same level. But the reality is you're not working with just animals. They're skinned. And, the point is that in this case, you're working with lab-grown, sterile meat. And that is rife. It's perfect conditions for the growing of dangerous things. Now, anyway, watch it for yourself. In every possible way, this is a bad decision, and he's still forcing it. A lot of them are. I think there's an agenda there. Now, Daily Mail writes that farmers will be ordered to feed cows methane suppressants to stop them belching and breaking wind under, again, the reality was the fart dynamic is not even the reality of the situation. And weird that became the fixated part of it. But this was on 2023 of April. This is all from the previous show we discussed, as well as this one. Major livestock producing countries commit to mitigate methane. So let's be clear. The issue of methane is not an issue in the context of what we're talking about here. And what they're doing in most cases are adding something that it does bring along danger. So like everything else we're talking about. And you've already got commitment from most of the countries doing this to do so. This is back in 2023. Here's the conversation. Other things we discussed in this show, but specifically the part about, actually, it's not even the title, but this was the show we discussed that in. So the links are all down below if you want to check the show out and include it for you. Now, today, this is from November 26th. Major retailers join forces with the UK dairy farmers to trial methane-reducing feed additives. Don't you love the trial? So you're the experiment, as usual. Now, yes, they've already done studies and so on, but the point is that this should not be something that's decided without your agreement. Because you realize we're not talking about an individual company. I mean, we are, but we're talking about a government agenda. Right? Signing major country agreements to do this. That's my point. It's coming from some kind of centralized, great reset, sustainable development goals mindset. So there's pressure from a government level, and they argue benefits, which ultimately end up being coercive to, you get funding or you don't based on what actions you take. It's the ESG dynamic. right? So here we are, where their major retailers are joining forces with UK farmers to reduce this, and you start to see this spin out through the conversation. My point is that individually they could decide to do these things if they wanted to, and that's the free market dynamic where you can then go, well, fine, I'm not going to buy your milk because I don't want that. The problem is that this becomes coercive and forced, and the guys that we have to do this, we're all going to die from climate change, which drives them to take action, which ultimately ignores harm. Because the illusion, the assumption is that we're in more danger if we don't do this now. Even if it hurts you, we're all going to die in a year if we don't do it now. So then it becomes, well, it's danger. It's the benefits outweigh the risks. We're back in that same square. So here it is, and we're talking specifically about Bovaer, however you pronounce that. And this is concerning to me for obvious reasons. Now, there's plenty of groups that have boycotted this already, right out of the gate. Boycott calls grow over Arla's Bovaer feed trial for dairy cows. Here's what it says. The company, which owns the UK's largest dairy cooperative, revealed on November 26th of this year that it's partnering with a major British retailer such as Morrison's, Aldi, and Tesco. Now, to trial the specific Bovaer, a methane-reducing product. Now, whether these companies have overlapping interests that might be funded by some Gates project or so on, which is certainly possible. People like this have their fingers in everywhere. It's like the Clinton overlap. It's just so far-reaching. Doesn't mean you should ignore it. My point, though, is specifically the company, which I forget the name. It'll get, hold on, it's right here. It is Elanco US Inc. It does not appear to be funded by Bill Gates. Unless I'm missing that, please let me know, because it wouldn't surprise me. But I think it's important that we're accurate about this, because it gets reported as, the Bill Gates thing. And clearly you could point that he supports this. He does. I mean, he's funded his own versions of it. Just important to highlight that I do not believe that he's specifically funding this group. But again, you could argue that it's through some other thing that you can't connect it to him, which would kind of make sense today. I honestly outwardly wonder why they continue to do certain things that they know will cause outrage. Why wouldn't they just use a shell company? You know what I mean? So we have to think about that going forward. But it says, while Arla claims the initiative will help British farmers transition to more sustainable practices, the trial has sparked significant backlash from environmental and health advocates, which maybe we should listen to them, seeing as how that's their what they do. They're advocates for environment and health, and they're concerned about it. The point is that this is not an individual company doing this because they think this is the move to more sustainable practices. Which my point is, it's not more sustainable, guys. It's not. It's actually exactly the opposite. The only reason they use the word sustainable is because they claim it's helping with climate change. When you actually look at what needs to be done, it's hardly more sustainable. And in fact, it's more dangerous. But it says it works by suppressing an enzyme in the cow's stomach that produces methane. Now, right out of the gate, I made the same argument last time. We don't know what this ultimate looks like going forward. You never really do. There's studies they've done, which may give you some insight, and you do find, we'll go over it in a minute, there's some interesting examples that show that there might be longer-term issues. Like, so suddenly it suppresses this enzyme for the digestive process. And that is a byproduct of something that we didn't predict. And you don't find out until suddenly people are breaking out with cancers everywhere, or whatever it does. Or the cows all start dying. My point is, these things are never fully fleshed out. And we've seen this time and time again. As people point out about this right now, as we'll go through the actual examples, which actually seem pretty concerning, the point is that even if they're benign, and it just says, well, it seems dangerous, but in small amounts it's not, and it's worth it. How many things like that have we gone through to go back and look and go, well, turns out they were wrong? How about COVID-19 injections they still deny? Or any number of things looking back as far as you want to look. Agent Orange, or, there's 1,000 different things, DDT, or things currently they're ignoring, like dioxins or PFAS or whatever else. The point is that I think that is concerning. We should not be okay with them giving something to a mass-consumed product that is suppressing normal bodily processes for the interest of something that, in fact, doesn't need to be done. But it says, how critics argue that the long-term effects of the additive on animal health and environments are unknown. You know why? Because they are, which is my point. So if we don't know the long-term effects, how in the world are we talking about and already using this in a product that is more widely used than damn near anything we know about? Milk. Now, this was put out as a boycott, this tweet here. And it says the ingredients in Bovaer: silicon dioxide, propylene glycol, and what's ultimately broken down to 3-nop. It's a nitrooxypropanol. Nitrooxypropanol, not that hard actually, but 3-nop or 3-NOP is what the abbreviation is, have raised serious concerns. We'll go through two of them in particular. Despite claims from animal nutrition experts, the company behind Bovaer which, okay, just so it's clear, despite the company itself using their experts to tell you it's okay, that it is safe for animals and customers, the UK Food Standards Agency issued a report last year highlighting the potential dangers of 3-NOP because they're there. So that's my point. So no, if there were any dangers and they wouldn't, why are we even entertaining this conversation? Well, because they say, well, climate change. Well, you have to do this now or we're all going to die. So it's okay. You take the risk. No. It's not okay. Not for me or my family. You take it if you want. All right. But the problem is this becomes something that is immersed. And there's already conversations about whether it's being folded into the other milk supply, which I haven't been able to verify. In fact, I think it's a little bit of misunderstanding, but it would not surprise me. But it says the report describes it as as coercive to the eyes, skin irritant, potentially harmful by inhalation, and we'll go over these. Despite the backlash, Arla claims it's committed to its sustainability goals with a target to reduce CO2 by 30% 2030. There you go. That is what is more important to the narrative than anything else, and maybe they believe it. The point, though, is that they're willing to take these risks because we're all going to die if we don't. See how dangerous that becomes? How much is allowed and honest people fall for? I don't know how, because it's the most obvious thing in the world, but Mr. Fireside broke this down, saying that this is being added to beef and milk because it's thought to prevent climate change. And he says, he calls it woke science, which, to be clear, again, this is the same game that gets played from the partisan level. Yes, obviously it slants to the left, but realize, as we've already pointed out, there are people from the Republican side, even currently in his administration, that are previously pushing back on this, but have now changed tune because it's beneficial to them and are not part of the Republican climate change side of this. And it does exist. It's very clear. And then when you realize that whether they call it climate change or whatever they want to call it, you can prove that the same actions are being taken for other reasons and other flavors that go in the same direction. It's just very clear, but people don't want to acknowledge it because they want it to fit their partisan view. Now, what was the main point we're going to show here? I forgot I had it pulled up here. Hold on. Oh, this one right here. Okay. Oh, it's already up. See, there you go. So there's a bunch more than you can read. It's just all different thoughts on different things. This point was saying the beef and the Bovaer beef and milk are fast making their way into the shelves. Coles, Australia, Aldi stores, Lurpak products, Arla products in the UK, those just growing. The FDA has also approved it for the US market. It's coming your way. Now, it says the company that owns Bovaer they say it's safe and passed European Safety Authority tests. The report says the genotoxic potential of 3-NOP has not been fully clarified. I'll show you the study. So we don't really know whether it's, toxic, but we're going to die it anyway because, climate change. 3-NOP was found in the liver, kidneys, and adrenal glands, bone marrow, muscle, fat, and brain of the tested animals. But don't worry. It does not translate, even though I can show you that it kind of does. The panel considered the consumer products. I think I'll go through most of this as we go through it, but the thread's important to give you some important breakdown. Yeah, so in other words, small amounts are found in the cows. And I'll go through the actual science. I think it's more important to read it from the studies so you can see that it's not just a person's point, but the good thread, breaking the stuff down. And here's the company itself. The proven solution for methane reduction. Proven. It's a big claim. Well, it isn't. It seems to be proven that it reduces the amount of methane, whether that's necessary or its benefits outweigh the risk dynamic. That's, I argue, not true, but up for debate. And realize that all it does is reduce it by, on average, the number shows to be 27%. That's it. A 27% reduction in methane from the cows. Now, even if it's just what we can see in the byproducts, I argue it's flat out not worth it because this is not something we need to worry about. But whether we end up with some long-term issue from this, then we can look back, and I hope we don't. I hope we don't have to play that game, but it seems how this works. Here is an FDA release from the FDA.gov website, or rather just, that's posted on theirs. You can read what they responded. Now, this happens to be in regard to a inquiry about this company. Now, Elanco is the company again, Elanco US Inc. Now, to cut to the chase, you can read what they wrote. It's just simply to read what the actual, kind of an MSDS kind of dynamic, which this is not explicitly that, but this is the same idea. Stands for Material Safety Data Sheet. It's about the information. So you can see right here, 3-NOP, 10%. Silicon dioxide, 60%. And it goes on to highlight propylene glycol as well. So I wanted to go over just some of these things to start. Now, first, just propylene glycol. And I want to make a point about this. It doesn't, now what's funny about this in a scary way, there's so many things like this that are kind of regarded as benign because they're everywhere, which you look into them and they're not really benign. There's people arguing scientifically, by the way, and there's a whole side point to get into about whether there are a lot of people who have an allergy to milk, that it turns out that they have an allergy to propylene glycol. And because it's prevalent I guess prevalent would be the wrong word, but is present in milk because of this overlap, that might be the case. But that's for another conversation. The point, though, is that this is something that is in a lot of other things. I get what I was trying to say right there, is just how crazy it is. These things can be so prevalent, and yet it turns out that they're not really ultimately safe in the way that they say they are. But the main point I want to make is could potentially lead to trace amounts of this in dairy products and that are consumed by breastfeeding mothers. So this is one of the other things that are in this. So all I'm showing you is that the process of this and how it's being used can translate in one of the ingredients, which in and of itself should not be okay, period. But what I want to highlight is that these are other ingredients that also carry over, and all of them show the same thing. We'll go over it. So it's pretty clear that this stuff does translate. So whether it's in breast milk for women or for a cow, we're talking about the same kind of idea. And I'll show you the studies that break this down. So if this does have some level of translation, you should know that. And you should be able to, this should be able for you to weigh, not some government program that puts this in something that you're not aware of. Oh, I'll leave that up, actually. So the next part is what it says right on the document. Under warning, not for human use. Caution should be exercised when handling this product. It may damage male fertility and reproductive organs. That's right on the FDA page. So, if it translates, which it does, even if it's a fraction, as always, what they play the game is whatever it is, generally accepted as safe or whatever. The whole benefits outweigh the risk dynamic. But you have to realize, even if they say that, that means that there is still a level of detriment. This is still, even if it's a fraction of what would cause the normal amount, it's still giving you a fraction of that damage. That's important to realize. It's not like they just drop below a certain level and it doesn't harm you. It's a dangerous substance. So it does have that response, but to a smaller level, and maybe you won't even notice it. The point is, you should know this and it should matter. Then the question becomes, is it bigger than it looks? Is there more going on? Is it more prevalent? Is it going to be something that you digest in other products that you don't realize? You're not just drinking milk, but you're eating other dairy products. You can see how this can spin out into something that's much more problematic. And then you can realize that it seems like every single thing under the sun that we are constantly talking about that is in everything you're digesting and wearing and breathing, whether it's glyphosate or PFAS or dioxins, that all seem to lead to fertility and reproductive issues. I guess that's just one of those coincidences. The bottom line is that this is right on the document. The thing that is in this milk and can translate, which I'll show you, can lead to fertility and reproductive organ problems. It seems pretty important to me. Now here's on the Wikipedia of what that's the 3-nitrooxypropanol. 3-nope. What it says. The FDA concluded that Bovaer meets safety. And see, the point is they're talking Bovaer because that's what the main chemical is, and it's already on Wikipedia. That the Bovaer meets safety and efficacy standards for use in lactating dairy cattle, stating that it does not negatively impact the milk production or quality. Oh, well, what about safety? It seems like an important, as long as milk is okay, as long as the milk tastes okay and produces the same amount, then that's all we care about, apparently. The point, though, is efficacy standard. What do you mean efficacy? Bovaer is about reducing methane. This is about the safety of the product that does that. But their first sentence is about how it does not seem interesting. Then it goes on to say 3-nop can be harmful if inhaled and is an irritant to the eyes and skin. Now, that's the general thing. Not necessarily passing through the cow and into the milk, but there is still that overlap. It does exist. Then it says, the product has been approved for use in over 55 countries. Approved. Financial incentives for farmers through participation in voluntary carbon markets. Okay, so you see where this goes. Whether or not, let's just even say this is completely benign. I don't think it is. But what it does, it creates this dynamic where you now have farmers who are playing this game of carbon markets, carbon credits. And that is a way to coercively drive them into doing exactly what they want. We've already talked about this. I mean, no, I don't think anybody out there is confused about what that means. Now, it's expected to come from carbon marketplace participation through platforms like Atheon or Truterra, which allow farmers to sell verified carbon credits generated by their methane reductions. So just on a pure financial benefit, you're going to get people that do this because they'll benefit from it. You're bribing them to do something that most farmers probably wouldn't do. And then eventually can coercively use that to get them to take actions they really wouldn't want to do. Helps create a robust market for carbon credits, says it right there. So maybe that's the only point. Maybe it's about getting people walked in, normalized with the idea of your carbon credit, social credit control structure, which is one part of the Great Reset dynamic. Now, here's a study from 2021. Safety and efficacy of feed additive consisting of 3-NOP, Bovaer. It's very simple. The genotoxicity of 3-NOP is not completely elucidated. That's where we are now. This is an old study, but that's what they're referencing in current information. We don't know. So on top of the very clear issues that will guaranteed to be lesser than if you just drank 3-NOP, but are still there, reproductivity, organ issues, possible skin irritation, and so on. And then, the unknown of how that can hurt or affect your DNA, which is what it means. Genotoxicity. Again, the almost ubiquitous attributes to everything that they say is totally harmless. I'm not making this up. It's everywhere you look. Genotoxicity, reproductive issues, immune suppression. Weird how it all comes together. It's right there in the study. Here's another one. This one is outcome of assessment of 3-NOP. And this one is from 2023. Here's what it says. At 200 milligram dose, effects identified included decreased ovary size, decreased serum activities of alanine aminotransferase, something in your body, and lactate dehydrogenase, and reduced feed and water intake. So again, to be clear, we're talking about the animals. In this case, we're talking about the cows that are being given this. But the point is, it's the same thing, and to a lesser degree, that I'll show you in a minute. It does, a small degree, but does translate through the milk. So again, it's not that for example, more dangerous, I argue, than the dioxin point we just covered, but it is still something that you should be aware of and you have a right to say no to. I don't want this stuff being put in my infant's mouth that probably has a longer lasting issue for their reproductivity or their immune suppression. Or maybe this is far worse than they're telling us in the studies, as usual, it seems. But in this case, we're talking about the animals. And it's talking about specifically that at this level, which again, down here, it points out that that's what they're giving, decreased ovary size. So same point, different study, but also reduced feed and water intake. So the animals have that response. So again, does that not have some kind of a byproduct? All of these things will over a long period of time. The group concluded that the additive could be considered safe at 200 milligrams and that the margin of tolerance of 2 could be established. So realize they're saying they conclude that that is the safe level despite ovary size being decreased. It's the same every time we look at this. The same thing we saw in the Pfizer study for the COVID shot. I keep showing you this. It was a almost 10% decrease in the pregnancy index. And they said because it was under 15, we don't have to report it. I've read that 45 times. That was on Pfizer's own documents. Don't you think women would want to know that that shot gives them almost a 10% decrease in their pregnancy index? Yeah, they really would. Same thing here. Yeah, that's considered to be safe. I care that ovary size will be reduced or reproductive organs will be produced, even if it is a fraction. We all should. Then it says the group we're talking about the group that did the study, concluded that at higher dose levels, 300 milligrams, the additive has the potential to cause mesenchymal cell hyperplasia and benign tumors. Doesn't sound like something that's not worrisome. I mean, there are clear overlaps to this. And 300 milligrams. Now, you can look up the information. It's not this differences wherever you look. Now, the group concluded the additive should be considered coercive to the eyes and the skin, which is common for everything else we've shown you. I think that was it. And the study here from Food and Chemical Toxicology from Science Direct from 2019 says residues in edible tissues and milk upon 3-NOP administration may be present in minute amounts. There you go. But unlikely, it says, because the majority of the applied radio label is exhaled as CO2. But, oh, that's right. I didn't have it in this, but I can search for it real quick. I lost the highlighting. It's only 75%. Was eliminated as carbon dioxide. So there's a 25% variable there. So 75%, they're saying approximately was what they released as carbon dioxide by breathing this stuff out. Right? But the problem is that if the majority, even if it's the majority, which they're claiming it is, that's 25% that's not. That doesn't sound like a minute amount to me. Because again, read it again. The residues in edible tissues, meaning what you might consume from that cow, and milk have 3-nop that may be present in minute amounts, but they say, but unlikely because the majority is exhaled as CO2. But it's not. It is the majority, but that's 75%. I think that's interesting. And it says 3-nop is quickly transformed into endogenous HPA and further degraded products and incorporated into carbohydrates, lactose. Okay, well, doesn't that then sound exactly how it ends up in milk or other parts of your body? Yes, it does to me. And it says the concentration of radioactivity in the edible tissues of the lactating goat. So there's two. This one's about a goat that they tested this on, was low, but not non-existent. And it says only approximately 5% of the dose were found in the edible tissues, and approximately 6% of the dose was found in milk. 6%. That is hardly nothing. So we're talking about specifically the 3-nop, but obviously others as well if it translates. But 3-nop is what they're focusing on here. 6% were found in milk and edible meat that you're going to eat. So now realize that you're now eating meat from that cow, but you're also drinking the milk. So now maybe you get 12%. You see how clearly this gets out of control? And it says in most of the milk, the radioactivity was associated with lactose. Radioactivity does not sound like something we should ignore. So all of this shows you that this is something that is being ignored because, well, climate change is more important. It's very clear to me. The intake, and again, if you haven't caught that, that's not the reality. We've talked about this so much over the years. Frankly, I think it's one of the most embarrassingly obvious lies. That's why I don't do too much work on it these days. I just think it's pretty it's like everything else we're talking about. There are people that are like religiously into this conversation, but the science is pretty obvious. Anyway, we got to do it many times. The intake assessment that goes on for the consumer is challenging, but seems possible, using the total radioactive residues in the edible tissue, thereby discounting identified endogenous substances, i.e. radioactivity identified as lactose in milk, as well as radioactivity thought to be incorporated into protein or fat. Under conclusion, it says these metabolic reactions eventually result in the incorporation of 3-nop carbon into carbohydrates, and most likely also into amino acids and fatty acids, which you will then consume if this was one of those animals. Here's the study itself. I recommend you look for it. There's a lot in this. There's other parts I had highlighted that I don't want to try to track down. I think that's incredibly important. Now, I want to be clear, and of all the things we're talking about, the small amount that translates into the meat that they're denying, by the way, is on the lesser scale, at least what I can see, of some of the things we're talking about, but this is still a huge story. The reality that they're lying about it, and the question is why? Why are they doing this? Which I am of the mind that they don't think the climate change lie from the highest levels of power. It's a ploy. So what is the real objective here? Depopulation? Maybe. I mean, not something we should dismiss. It's a very real conversation, eugenics conversation. Maybe there's something else, which we'll get into next. Maybe there's more to the story than just what we're being shown, as usual, right? Now, just quickly to show this is Alexandria, and plenty of others made this point, showing you one of these milks. It's in Norway, I believe. And they're saying they began selling climate milk from cows being fed toxic 3-nop. Then it says they didn't want to buy it, so now they're mixing it with climate milk. Now, this is coming from Peter Sweden, I think. That's what most people just copy what he wrote and put it out. And by the way, she's a proud Zionist. I think that should matter today. What I think is important, though, is if you look at this, all that says is lightweight O5 fat, 25%, right? That's what it's saying. And down here it says Q climate milk, which is what it is. So be clear, this does have the Bovaer in it, is ordinary milk from Norwegian cows that burp less and is fine. That's what it says. Q climate milk comes from cows that emit 25 to 30% less methane. That's what that means. That's what the number is. So I don't know whether they think they're confusing that. That's the image they're all pointing to. But maybe there's it's Norway translation. Maybe there's more out there, guys. It would not surprise me for two reasons. That if they would like nobody buys it, let's say, and they start mixing it, because they are going to argue, well, there's no danger. So the studies all say it's safe. So what's the issue, right? Well, clearly there's an issue because you're having to mix it because we don't want that, and they know that. But my point is, I haven't proven yet that I can prove that they're doing that. If you have got something that can show that they're now mixing it and putting it out on a shelf, especially if it's on a shelf without that label, please get that in front of me. Get that to Orwell in the chat. Somebody please get that to me. That's a huge point. Today, I was unfortunately not able to verify that. And lastly, I just want to share this one I used for the show today. Sal shared this. Again, I swear to God, we're sharing these things. Is that like I keep doing this and you share it, then you come back and it's unshared. It's like Twitter is so broken today. But carbon reduction sets you free, it says. And it's an old school prison. This is how that feels right now. All of this stuff. Or, come join us for the good AI Bitcoin revolution. It's just like, join us in this panopticon. We're being played everywhere. And as Sal points out, you are the carbon they want to reduce. That's an article you can read, by the way, or bumper sticker. Very important to consider all this, but also to consider what else could be happening, right? So as we've highlighted all of this, we should be asking what else might be going on, whether it's milk or anything else. As Doom points out, breaking just in, U.S. Department of Agriculture issues order mandating bird flu testing of all of the milk supply. Could be just a coincidence overlap. Those do exist. But I find it interesting, the timing of all of that, right? When you're getting this big push around this milk conversation, and all of a sudden they're pushing for national testing of the milk supply. Now realize most of what we just pointed to is in other countries, in the UK and Norway. But the timing is hard to miss. And as Doom rightly points out, time to bust out the PCR with a cycle threshold of 45 plus. If you don't remember what that means, the PCR test was something, as even the creator, Carrie Mullis, pointed out, is not designed to tell whether you're sick or not. It is simply, ultimately, the higher you put the cycle threshold, you can find literally anything. And that's not hyperbole, by the way. He almost jokingly says it will help, makes you believe in God. The smaller you go, you'll find everything everywhere. He literally makes his point, and it's not an illusion. The point is that using the cycle threshold that high, you will find anything, anywhere you want to look for it. And the bottom line is the cycle threshold 45, if you want to make it simple for those that find that to be hard to believe, upwards of 95% false positives. That's the point. As Dr. Scoglio, PhD, tested a kiwi live on the air to get a false positive. Same point. And then, of course, after they got the injection, they tested them with a 25 cycle threshold, which made it look like they weren't sick. I, by the way, reached out to Denny Rancourt to get him back on the show to discuss his, important, I argue, landmark study around the data showing you that if they wanted to, they could have made this without having any pathogen. Doesn't have to say that there wasn't. The point is, mathematically speaking, you could have made an entire illusion if they wanted to. And I do think that's largely what happened. The idea that conflating flu and pneumonia, cycle threshold false positives, and then calling vaccine side effects, COVID-19, it's why flu vanished. Actually, I think there's a tweet I'll show in a second. But so back to the point, all of a sudden they're calling for testing all of the milk supply. So right here, we should be asking two things. What are they just trying to test it? Or are they doing something else? Or even before it, is Bovaer or whatever else we're talking about only what they're saying, or is there something else there? These are just possible theoretical questions, and we know anybody that would immediately go, that's fake, that's conspiracy, you are part of the problem today. Yes, you could point to something and say that's unlikely. I don't believe they would do that, but to reflexively dismiss a possibility because you don't like it or because you've been trained to think that it's lunacy, that is the problem. It's like anything else we talk about. If you go into it expecting to find what you will find what you're looking for. If you go, that can't be real, but I'll look at it, you're going to end up concluding it's not real because you already set that tone. If you're of the mind that your government is not capable of doing something surreptitiously like that, you have not educated yourself about the history. You haven't looked into the COVID-19. So on this conversation of the milk, we should ask these questions, and let's not forget. This goes back to April of this year. Remnants of bird flu virus found in pasteurized milk, FDA says. I mean, frankly, I don't even know if I believe this. And we've talked about this, but this was on July 28th. Bird flu emergency declared. Don't forget that, by the way. Now, they declared an emergency for bird flu, but they broadened it out to include flu. Just literally flu in this country is under an emergency declaration. Normal seasonal flu. Again, one of these things that we broke down that nobody else seems to identify, which should be a huge story, but fell under the radar. And then once it eventually comes to pass, of course, the partisan screamers will make it a point. But if we had noticed it before then, maybe we could stop it. Love to see that happen. But the point is that this is already there. COVID vax mRNA found in breast milk. September 27th, 2022. So the point is to overlap this with the idea of what can translate into milk. So is it not possible that they could even just point out that they're giving mRNA injections to the cattle too. Maybe that can translate, which we all have considered. But my point is to ask whether there might be something else going. Are we watching them manufacture the next illusion or creating the real next problem? These are all very real questions we should ask, and they have done this before. It's not an illusion. You could prove they've tested on Americans hundreds of times. They've admitted to many of them, like Operation Sea Spray. Or here's one from April 8th, 2023. Mice that were vaccinated, in quotes, because you'll see why, with mRNA-loaded milk. These are not, and just as always, for those new to the show, every one of these things are coming from peer-reviewed science, from government documentation. Not to say that we blindly believe what they're telling us, but it's to point out that these are not some fringe, random, some tweet where somebody claims they saw something. That's not how we work. We talk about things that we can prove. And in this case, or we make it clear that we're giving you a hypothetical possibility around something we can prove. They're arguing they inoculated these mice with milk that they loaded with mRNA. So if we're worried about the translation, there's very real reason to be worried about it. And on top of that, about whatever else may be coming across. Here's one of the studies. An oral vaccine for SARS-CoV-2 in milk-derived exosomes. There's multiple examples like this. So I'm worried about what might be beginning to be set up or might have already happened or might be going on next. This is from Trial Site News. Chinese load cow's milk with mRNA exosomes, successfully immunizing mice. Recep Levy points out peer-reviewed study detects vax mRNA in milk of lactating moms shortly after vax, which, by the way, we already know. We were breaking this stuff down in 2021. Raises concerns of babies' exposure to toxic mRNA. Remember, right in the beginning, one of the first deaths that we highlighted was the infant that died, I think it was within a day of breastfeeding. And it's very clearly shown to be an immediate reaction to what they were doing. And it was denied immediately, but we saw more and more of it. And this is the reality where we are. 2022, detection of messenger RNA COVID-19 vaccines in human breast milk. For the podcast, these are all different studies. JAMA Network, it's constant and still ignored. Or how about this one? McCullough Foundation points out persistence of spike protein at the skull, meninges, brain axis may contribute to neurological sequelae. Or how do you say that? Again, it's I forget. COVID-19. The point is your spike protein continues to be made. Now, of course, we should also point out that it's possible this is all completely manufactured. But my point has always been consider the possibility that this is all, a theater, but realize that what we're talking about is a protein. A protein comes from anything that was once alive. So if we're of the mind that we don't think viruses are real, which is something you should not ignore, I'm not sure. I'm in the middle still. I have been for a long time because I don't think either side of that conversation has fleshed it out enough for me to feel that all the questions are answered, which seems to irritate everybody. The point, though, is that bacteria, for example, which it seems that most people in that theory, in that camp, acknowledge is real, can have proteins, right? So my point would be simply that just a protein does exist. So wherever you think that comes from, you shouldn't say that necessarily has to be a virus. My point is that if you see a spike protein that is causing a problem, that seems like a very real thing that we can easily show is possible. So when we can see that spike proteins are continuing to be produced in the body, realize that we're not even talking about a virus here. We could be talking about something, and again, that's what we're talking about. We're talking about an injection that causes the mass production of these proteins. We all agree that's possible. So the point would be whatever they're doing is the problem, whether or not you think those things are there. And realize that we can show repeatedly the spike protein itself is cytotoxic and that it continues to reproduce, or rather just be produced. And the bottom line is that is exactly what we're pointing to here. What is going on? What is this being primed for? I mean, I think it was it Martin, Dr. Martin, about the priming the platform idea, or maybe it was George Webb, I forget. But this is what, like, he argued that they drilled the well, and this is where they're waiting to, the next step, which is very concerning to me. And then on the point of proteins itself, January 16th, 2024, gain of function's newest brain virus, genetically engineered proteins to control everything. Again, high-level peer-reviewed science coming from Harvard, coming from Nature or Cell.com. And what they're highlighting is, in this case, specifically, one of the main ones was, now I'm blanking on it, ferritin. And they're already working on, actually, I'll just grab that too. Ferritin injections, deadly lipid nanoparticle spike protein design, and the new mod RNA ferritin nanoparticle universal flu injection. These are real things that are actually already being put together. They're already testing these things in real world settings. The reality of it is dangerous. And at this point, it's about showing you how they're genetically modifying or engineering proteins to just control, to influence, to create, to do all sorts of terrifying things. So that's my point back to the original, is that we don't even have to get into the idea of whether you think a virus is there. They could be literally manufacturing these things in all sorts of ways. And the overlap with the milk that we just showed you is itself coming through breast milk with the cows. I think there's something in there that makes me very uncomfortable. Add this one to the show notes for you. Now, on the lastly on this segment, before we jump into the conversation of Trump's cabinet and the mRNA overlap, well, actually, and I will play. I'll play that in a second. I have a clip from Dr. Martin that I want to include that overlaps with the Trump administration from last time. But here is, as Pelham points out from last year, the World Economic Forum spokeswoman who believes that there will be never-ending pandemics. Why? Due to CO2 and methane emissions.
Scientist, so I'm not in a position to talk about vaccination, but this is not going to be the last pandemic that we see. We'll see more and more pandemics arising due to climate impacts and the emergence of new bacteria as a result of increased greenhouse gases and methane emissions, so that we just don't have immunity to. So I think, as a collective, everyone's been talking about COVID, but okay, that's COVID and it's going to stay with us, but this is just the start.
She seems to know for sure a lot of things that nobody knew, right? Definitely going to be with us, which, by the way, was what we all were telling you in the beginning. This was an ongoing dynamic that, was yearly COVID shots, all these things they were so aggressively shouting down. Funny how it's exactly where we are now. The point being, the lie around CO2 and methane and the idea that we're somehow changing. This is the normal cycle. You can look back hundreds of thousands of years. The point is they're trying to rationalize where we are with that cycle to make it seem like that's us causing it, and the end point being that that's going to cause more illnesses. Which I don't know how you read that in any other context if you know that point of other than them making that the case, whether through lies or actual release. I think that's incredible. Now, question it. Don't just take my word for it. I think the obvious point is that they're manufacturing the justification for whatever happens next. Here's Peter Hotez. This is from yesterday or 2 days ago, telling you the same thing. Now listen to the way he says this. This guy's a maniac. For crying out loud, Peter, get a comb and brush your teeth.
Here's the reason why we need to care about this stuff, Nicole, is that we have some big picture stuff coming down the pike starting on January 21st. Mr. Bloomberg mentioned H5N1. That I'm really worried about.
On January 21st? Because, we all know how viruses and pathogens love to follow a timeline, right? They must have an appointment with Peter Hotez.
It's all over wild birds on the western part of the United States and going up in the north. It's getting into the poultry. We're seeing sporadic human cases. No,
guys, he's making this sound like it's everywhere. We've all proven that. No, it's not. You're finding very sparse examples of, by the way, which I don't even think we can prove. They're using PCR tests, guys. I hope you know that. We've already talked about this. So for all we know, it's not even existing, or maybe it's just the flu, or any number of other overlaps. But to make it sound like this is everywhere, even with their own narrative, is just not true. They've been hyping small examples of this for a long time. This guy is a career hype man.
Human-to-human transmission yet, but that could happen. It's in the...
Right. So we have all these cases of bird flu popping off, but we have yet to see human-to-human transmission. I mean, so you could argue that, what's the right word for it? Not anthropological, but whatever the word is for how long, the timeline of how these things evolve. Aren't we told always how these things take thousands of years to evolve, but yet weirdly we got one after another during COVID-19, which obviously was not really happening? So why do you think it's going to pop off tomorrow, despite there being seemingly no evidence for that actually happening? The catalyst for why things, even if it's actually what goes on, jumping to a human from an animal, again, the zoonotic transfer point in general, there's very high-level people that are highly respected that push back on that. That is an illusion in and of itself. But he wants you to think that it's everywhere and that it's right around the corner, despite everything saying the opposite. This guy, I'm telling you, this guy's job is to scare you.
Cattle, it's in the milk. And that's just the beginning. We have another major corona, but that could happen. It's in the cattle, it's in the milk.
See, based on what he just said to you, it's in the chickens, it's in people are getting it. They're in the cattle and the milk. Oh, so just broadly, bird flu is in the cattle and your milk? Think about saying such an irresponsibly broad statement on MSNBC as a supposed health, whatever you want to call it. It's not in the cattle and in the milk. You've had very specific examples of where you claim you found that. As we just showed you about being in pasteurized milk. That's not everywhere in the country. It was one example. You look at the guy's eye. I mean, guys, this guy is a maniac. I just can't get past how dangerous these people are. While they point this to people like us who are being objective, and yes, talking about things that in it are hypothetical possibilities, but using factual, provable information. It's just because we continue to be shown to be right, and these people continue to be shown to be wrong. They are after people. It seems to be most everybody outside of the mainstream today willing to call out these kind of lies. Why do people like this continue to have a place?
And that's just the beginning. We have another major coronavirus likely brewing.
What does that even mean? Likely brewing? Do you realize how abstract these statements are? What is you boiling it in a pot? You realize that, I mean, I could go, it just kills me. This is what I think is so hilarious. If you ask people who are educated in this field, they laugh at this guy. What he just said is stupid.
Asia, we've had SARS in 2002, SARS-2, COVID-19 in 2019. And we know these viruses are jumping from bats to people thousands of times a year. But there's still.
You mean like when you guys went there with Ralph Barrick and literally did that? Made that happen with self-spreading injections or self-spreading, at least as they claim, right? That's the reality of this. If you want to go into that part of it, questioning all of it, whether it's valid or not, their own evidence shows you how far back they've been making this happen, or at least they laid out the false narrative to make you think that, but none of that's acknowledged in the conversation. These people are children.
We know that we have a big problem with mosquito-transmitted viruses all along the Gulf Coast, where I am here in Texas. So we're expecting dengue and possibly Zika virus coming.
And the 45 times I've covered the reality of both the things they use to create and manipulate the GMO mosquitoes, which causes them to, in fact, be stronger and not die, and translate that to their populations, or what they spray to go after them, which, in fact, cultivates a worse dynamic because it kills also the surrounding elements that fight them. So even if it does kill them in the process, I've proven this with their own studies that show that the populations actually grow. You think they don't know this? And again, for those new to the show, I'm referencing peer-reviewed science that goes over what they claim is happening. And here we are where it keeps being used. If you can't see that that's them manufacturing a problem that they have to deal with, then I don't think you're paying attention.
Coming back, or a Puche virus, maybe even yellow fever. And there's more. Then we have all this sharp rise in vaccine preventable diseases going up because.
You mean like the polio example that was caused by vaccine-derived polio?
Because of, in part, the anti-vaccine activism that's so prominent right now. We have
anti-vaccine. He made this whole term out of that, like we're some kind of lobby. These are just random moms out there who are trying to go, you're a murderer. And they go, oh, you're the vaccine lobby, anti-vaccine lobby. He said that on a public video to a random mom who, by the way, lost her child. That's the kind of person you're looking at.
A 5-fold rise in pertussis cases, whooping cough over the last year, 15 measles outbreaks this year. We've got polio.
15. Oh my gosh. Let's all break down the country and lock down, right? The point is these things are, really the point should be, and I'm gonna stop hyping this idiot, but at the end of the day, how do we know any of this is true? I'm not going to deny anything's possible, but why? These are the same people that lied to us about literally every part of what we just went through. And we're supposed to take them at face value now? I doubt any of you actually are. It's embarrassing. Big picture stuff coming down the pike, starting on January 21st. What does that even mean? because they have like an appointment, a certain timeline. It's just silly. It's really silly. Now, the important thing to realize, current administration of Donald Trump. Now, obviously, we have yet to get the 20th of January, so anything can change. But realize that the current administration is packed with mRNA supporters, including Trump himself, by the way, who continues to support the COVID-19 injection. But as Jane Ruby points out, President Trump is already pushing mRNA vaccines for cancer after the COVID shots caused the greatest surge in human cancers, the turbo cancer dynamic. And it says, and it should concern you that the VP pick, Vance, is heavily invested in more plasma mRNA with his buddy Vivek Ramaswamy, as well as numerous others. That should matter. This is from the Truth Social post. And I've shown you many examples of Trump pointing this out. Time to use mRNA for fight cancer. You don't think he knows what his audience thinks? So there's an agenda that is what's the right word for it? Like that. So he sees what you're pointing to. He sees that you know this stuff is dangerous, and he still pushes that narrative. Remember that whole thing he said where he can shoot someone in Times Square and you still vote for him? Well, there you go. It's exactly what he's talking about. Or the poem about the snake. Yeah, he told you. And you guys still wallow him because at the end of the day, he is pushing the thing that you guys somehow rationalize into being something else. It's a secret 4D chess move and he's trapping them. Yeah, I sure hope so. But how many times has that not come to pass? You guys get the point. That's why I think most conservatives are very uncomfortable with what's going on right now. And by the way, here's that clip from Dr. Martin. And again, this is the clip is entitled, "It's the U.S. Doing This." Now realize he's talking about what was going on in Trump's administration before, going back to the origin, even before his administration, but all through his administration, into the beginning of warp speed and into the first year of the COVID-19 illusion, and then into Biden's administration. But that's when this was being discussed.
Right after 9.
We should be having a public dialogue, and it should be something that rises to the level of legislation. We should not allow the National Institutes of Health or the Department of Defense to allocate funding to amplify these agents so that allegedly we can study them in the case that they fall into the hands of bad people. Because the evidence has shown us that the bad people who actually have unleashed these pathogens since 1991, and by the way, if you go to miscellaneous Memorandum 7 and other documents, we can go back to the 1950s. The bad people who unleash these things on the population are us. It is the U.S. who's doing it.
Now, I wouldn't say us. Obviously, it's the government, where I don't see it as this. Obviously, this is an entity that does not represent you. But here's the interview. This is from 2023. But realize the point is we go through these documents that go well back into Trump's administration. There's no way you could argue that this was not something they were involved with, especially with him continuing to support it to this day. Operation Warp Speed was his baby. So I just think that's important to recognize, guys. There's no way you can decouple these things, and yet people are choosing to ignore what's going on. Truth Seeker points out, if Trump was misinformed, which tends to be the narrative right now, like, the last cabinet was bad because he got tricked. He was misinformed about what was going on. He trusted Fauci. Somebody close to me made that point. He trusted what Fauci told him. Okay, fine. Still his fault. Are we in kindergarten? Are you not responsible for your choices because he tricked me? No, you still made the choice. As a true leader, which is not anybody in this conversation for the government, a leader is responsible. I don't care whether it was some lonely entity. The point is that if it happens under your administration, to your watch, or wherever context you're discussing, a team, if you're the leader, if you're the coach, it's your responsibility. Somebody who goes, no, he did it without asking me. That is somebody you should laugh at. That is somebody who's going to throw somebody subordinate to him under the bus to avoid responsibility for something that the leader should own, even if he wasn't involved. The point here is that during the COVID-19 dynamic, you can show 1,000 different examples that Trump made choices that were even against what Fauci wanted, which we can look back and still point to as a problem that had very negative consequences. And yes, there was Fauci there involved with it all as well. But did you not hear what his own people were saying about Fauci during the entire time? It's amazing the willful ignorance is created to ignore what he did and still promotes. But he says, if Trump was misinformed about the jab, why did he add pro-jab people to his cabinet today? If Trump was misinformed about the jab, why does he still praise it? And then he goes, don't forget that Marco Rubio is going to be Secretary of State. Here he is going, I know I looked away from the needle, but I need a tan, but vaccine is safe and effective, and I decided to take it myself. They're all on the same boat, guys. Here's his pick for Surgeon General. Janet, and we've played you all these before. Here, she's gushing about the vaccine. And as she says, who once said that the COVID vaccines were a gift from God. These are the people he's choosing. Now, we already went over the general cabinet conversation thus far anyway on November 30th, the new Trump administration and the technocratic Zionist coup of the United States. I recommend you check this one out because this is not some hyperbolic statement. I am convinced this is what's going on. Here's Alex Jones saying, remind your family today that the COVID event was all part of a carefully crafted lie designated to turn society into a permanent big pharma controlled police state. Can you imagine saying that while you're currently pretending Trump had nothing to do with that or ignoring his involvement or continuous support? Like it's things like this that show me this person is dishonest. You're playing into people's beliefs. And as David Icke points out, but your hero Trump oversaw lockdowns, gave Fauci a commendation, which he did, and claims to be the father of the vaccine, while the big pharma police state is really being orchestrated by the military like the fake vaccine on behalf of the global cult. You know, the globalism elements that he ignores, like Israel. Here's another example. And I don't know if you've seen this, but this is what's coming out of the Senate Select Committee. It's a lab. It was made in a lab. Wow, we were theorizing about that in 2020. Funny how everybody else was shouting us down. The point is that certainly still could be a possibility. And again, consider the bacteria point I made about whether it could be something other than a virus being used. The point is they're working on something in these labs. It appears to be the case. And I do think that they're doing something that's dangerous. But either way, Alex Jones is saying total vindication. The government just told us what the government did, and we buy it because it works for our narrative. That should be the headline. The government finds that the COVID-19 was made in a lab and a bioweapon. Okay, again, certainly could be. We were earlier than most people talking about that, but why do you trust what the government says? So the U.S. government breaks down that this was made in a lab that the U.S. government was responsible for, and you blindly take that as a vindication? Shouldn't we be a little more skeptical? But no, because it's the Democrats' bad guy, right? These are the good Republicans in Senate that do the good thing, and the good bad guy Democrats were the ones that did it. It's kindergarten level, guys. It's stupid. And as Ike says, so why did flu disappear worldwide when COVID appeared with its flu-like symptoms? Why did the symptoms, in quotes, go on increasing so they could designate more and more other diseases as COVID? This is what I was saying earlier. Why did they have to fix the cases with PCR tests that its inventor said could not tell if you were sick? Why did they have to fix the deaths by putting COVID on the death certificates with people who died from any other cause within 28 days? These are all things we talked about. Why were U.S. hospitals given massively increased money for diagnosing COVID and not regular flu or pneumonia? The point he's making, if this was a bioweapon, you could argue it was designed to be benign, but how would that make sense with how it's been used? It could mean that they lost control. It could mean it's certainly possible. But again, being objective with discernment, it does not line up. It's far more likely now with how we saw it continue and how it went. This was more what Danny Runcourt was saying. That it was, we've continued to consider the entire time that it may have not even been something that was there, that they were using all of the other things to combine to give you this impression. Doesn't mean they couldn't do something tomorrow. But if you're going to say we were vindicated that COVID-19 was a lab-made virus, it's a bioweapon, that implies that it's deadly, dangerous, or at least should be. That's not what happened. This is why did they kill tens of thousands in care homes? I mean, again, all these points, killing people with things that weren't the injection. Why? Why did they kill people with COVID treatment drug remdesivir, which was well known to cause multiple organ failure? I can go on and on. A bioweapon virus would not require any of this. It would do its job without any such manipulation. It's amazing that streetwise people will believe anything so long as it confirms the narrative that they have been pushing after year. Yes, well said. Now, by the way, I just thought of this. I want to show you this real quick. For some reason, when I try to highlight, yeah, look, I can't, for some reason, when I'm typing, it won't let me highlight. Only when I'm typing on Twitter. Not that that matters. I get this feeling that a lot of the stuff is tailored towards certain people. I think it's very strange. No matter how much I type, it won't let me highlight. And that causes me to make mistakes quite often, actually, which is probably the point. But of course, you do anything else, you can. I just find that interesting. As I said, I point these things out sometimes. More often than I don't. But I'm telling you guys, this is like 95% of my time experience on this platform is just nonstop weird things that don't make sense, don't line up. My, this doesn't work on my phone, it works over here. This doesn't work here, it works on my phone. It's just, really, it's either it's that clumsy of a platform, which is certainly possible, or it's being tailored to be clumsy for certain people. But David Knight also points out, as we've shown you many times, Alex Jones talking about the shot as harmless sugar water. I've shown you the clip many times. So if it's a bioweapon, which by the way included the piece from the shot, we're talking about the spike protein, how is it sugar water? I mean, these things have to be considered by people that watch these shows. Just be objective. Recognize that either he's that bad or lying to you. Kevin McKernan points out something around the modeling aspect, and I find this to be important because this is not about the deadly bioweapon. It's about the injection that was given. Now, you could also argue in that context that the injection itself was the bioweapon. Now, that's a fair argument to make, but that's not what he's saying over there. He's talking about the select committee of the government in the Senate arguing that the virus that was naturally circulating was actually made in a lab. See, that's very different than arguing that because this is what the reality, the data very clearly shows, other than trying to lean into what makes your narrative look good, is that the post-injection timeframe was when it really started to go bad. Kevin McKernan says the vax killed more than COVID. This is not modeling data, which is what everything else we tend to see. And we've already shown you this. Because look, this data was the same in 2021, 2022, when we were exclusively breaking this down from their own data. Funny how that backs up what we were screaming about and being called conspiracy theorists for, which is like anybody else that was doing it correctly. The point is, you can see post the injection, it's exploded, even though we're told it was 2019, 2020. It's very important to understand. Something happened, which was post-government action that caused excess death, but more than we've ever seen, it seems, in many and most locations. And also that the injection administration seems to weirdly correlate almost exactly with the rise of excess death. I'm sure you can figure that one out. Sense Receptor points out a great clip from Pierre Corey. The data shows a depopulation event. So whether it was intentional or not, you can argue about it, but the outcome of the pandemic, and particularly the mRNA shots, has led to incredible amounts of excess mortality. Now, again, all of this is to point out this is the current administration and the leader of the president himself who still support this stuff. I just hope that's something that can cause a little bit of awareness, discernment, uncomfortable feeling. You should be, because where it's going is dangerous and people are blinding themselves to it.
Read, and if you look at the history of this fascination with depopulation strategies, and they've actually tested vaccines in the past to look at that. I would say that I agree with you, Mark. And even if I said I didn't agree with you, like, oh, it couldn't be a depopulation, it couldn't have been willful and planned, right? Let's let some of our folks say, I don't believe that. Okay. The second thing I would add is, well, the data does show a depopulation event. So whether it was intentional or not, you can argue about it. But the outcome of the pandemic, and particularly the mRNA vaccines, has led to incredible amounts of excess mortality and young people dying. And then let's go a third option. Let's say it wasn't willful, and it was just a harmless series of unfortunate decisions. We chose the spike protein as the antigen for the vaccine. It doesn't explain how there's been other vaccines released which caused so much harm they were shut down and recalled. Here we had people, groups of awake citizens, studied citizens, groups of physicians all around the world who were screaming from the sidelines from within weeks of the campaign about the amount of damage and destruction and death they were seeing related to the vaccine. And yet everything was censored, everything was suppressed, and the machine kept going.
And Trump still supports it. And you know he's seen all this. I just don't know how anybody can make sense of that.
Jab campaign, they just ratcheted up more and more and more with late night show hosts, and they're singing their songs and cartoons and French fry giveaways. And like, I mean, I just watched this madness propelling this really toxic intervention. And so whether it was started willfully or not, there's too many actions that they've taken to propel something which has caused immense amount of deaths. I mean, there's about 9 different, Steve Kirsch has done this very well. There's numbers of different groups, many different arithmetical and statistical analyses predicting, but at last check, the average or best predictor of how many people have died in the United States, just the United States, is somewhere between 500,000 and 1 million people.
And Trump continues to argue that he saved millions of lives with the shots that killed millions of people. Pretty gross.
I've written a number of op-eds in major...
And just for the partisans that get angry about that point alone, realize that Biden continued it just as much.
Media outlets. One of them I wrote in Newsweek. And in 2023, as of the first 9 months of 2023, 158,000 more Americans died than would be predicted, than what is a normal rate. And that's more than all the combat losses since Vietnam, Vietnam including and since. And so, and yet there's no discussion, there's no congressional hearings. They did have an attempt at a congressional hearing in the UK because the UK is getting hammered with excess mortality. And there's only a couple of politicians willing to bring that to the floor. But we have had no systematic use, no recognition. I mean, the life expectancy in the United States in 3-year period went from 79 to 76. Who has to die to have life expectancy go from 79 to 76?
Wow.
It's not old people, it's young people. So it's not only that we've had excess mortality, but it's in the young and healthiest people of society. Ed Dowd's done these analyses. I've written extensively on this. The life insurance data doesn't lie. That's one thing you can't corrupt, right? That's a massive industry that lives on their data. And if you look at their reports, you see these massive explosions in the deaths of some of the youngest and healthiest, because it comes out of the group life insurance data, which is generally the Fortune 500 employed, major employers. These are, the working employed young is particularly white collar. I mean, that's the healthiest sector of society and always has been. And suddenly they're dying in the third quarter of 2021 at rates that have never been described outside of wartime. And yet, radio silence.
How do you not acknowledge that? Damn them for continuing to push this now. Damn them for allowing that to happen when it was clear in 2020. 2020. I don't know how many times I can play Dr. Bhakti screaming about this in 2020. Every gene-based vaccine is deadly. Here we are. That we were breaking down the data from 2020, showing you Forbes highlighting their own data that showed they knew that it wouldn't stop transmission. I mean, guys, this is so obvious. And those of us that were ahead of that conversation were just completely sidestepped, suppressed. I got kicked off Patreon, PayPal, everything. Thousands of dollars lost, even though we were correct. And it's not about me and being right. It's about the reality that people out there were breaking this stuff down and trying to save lives. And the people that are being driven to support the man who is supporting it and still refuse to acknowledge that it was obvious, or rather that they refuse to acknowledge that he continues to ignore the reality and support him anyway. Under some, I guess, flimsy argument that somehow it's a means to an end. I don't care what you think the end is. There's nothing that justifies what's happening there. Nothing. You're being played, and it's disgusting how obvious it is. Now, overlapping this with the conversation of digital currency and where we're going with the Bitcoin dynamic, or really just kind of the general Great Reset directive, Censorship also pointing out, Catherine Austin Fitts had to say, if you don't get central digital control in all digital monetary system, I don't care, she says, what vehicle you use to do it, whether it's the Federal Reserve, a CBDC, or Bitcoin. If you do that, you're walking into a digital concentration camp. Now, all of this overlapping together, the origin point of the original point of the milk, right? What they're doing to it, the overlap of the possibility of mRNA, the injections giving the population, all of this driving in a clear direction. And my overarching worry that there's something else going on in all of that. But even if not, whether we're talking nanotech or whatever else, that we are talking about the conflation, the combination of these conversations in order to lead you into a position that is easier to be controlled. And this is the technocratic discussion. And the point is, in this administration, you're seeing the hallmarks of every single part of this. And here's what Catherine has to say about it.
Up under a system of government where the bankers run monetary policy, but the people's representatives run fiscal policy. That's what the Revolutionary War was about. It was about taxation with or without representation. Now, if you're going to consolidate and collapse the system into the bankers on a very central basis, being able to control and operate both monetary and fiscal system, you're moving out of a world where we've known personal freedom and liberty into a world where it's what Augustine Carson's, the head of the BIS, said. We can make the rules centrally, and we have the technology to enforce those rules. In other words, we decide when and how and where you can spend your money.
Our analysis on CBDC, in particular for the use of general use, we tend to establish the equivalence with cash, and there is a huge difference there. For example, in cash, we don't know, for example, who's using a $100 bill today. We don't know who is using a 1,000 peso bill today. A key difference with the CBDC is that central bank will have absolute control on the rules and regulations that will determine the use of that expression of central bank liability. And also, we will have the technology to enforce that. Those two issues are extremely important, and that makes a huge difference with respect to what cash is.
Back to the pandemic, if you get central digital control in an all digital monetary system, and I don't care, what vehicle you use to do it, whether it's a Federal Reserve CBDC or Ripple or Bitcoin or something else we create, WorldCoin, if you do that, you are walking into a digital concentration camp. And that means, go back to the pandemic, if they don't want you going more than a mile from your house, your money won't work more than a mile from your house. Your electric car won't work more than a mile from your house. If they don't want you buying pizza, your money won't buy pizza, and you can't pay cash for pizza because you're in an all digital monetary system. We have 14 items in this blueprint of what states need to do. Number one is preserving cash and checks. You need to have, you cannot go to an all digital monetary system. You need to have an analog system. One of the reasons you need to have an analog system, everybody in North Carolina can explain to you why you need an analog system, because when the electricity goes, you better have cash. You better have an analog system. In New Zealand, when the cyclone came through 2 years ago, the head of the central bank stood up and gave a speech afterwards and said, thank God we had cash. If we hadn't had cash, nobody would have been able to transact. After what happened in Western North Carolina, the Norwegian central bank came out and said, we're down to 3% cash. We're going to reverse it because we're looking at what happens during disasters all around the world. And if you don't have cash, you're toast.
And your government knows that. Right. And there's a very clear dynamic being built for that one of many, but that exact purpose. Now, as she highlights, this is Trump's thing. World Liberty Financial. There's a lot of this building out right now. I sure hope that it's something that might be trying to fight with the same thing, which is certainly possible. But I think all of the evidence shows otherwise. And we discussed this in a recent IMA panel, the Independent Media Alliance, that Catherine is a part. Co-opting freedom, the Bitcoin sleight of hand, and the new AI control structure. Make sure you check it out, because I'm very concerned about where this goes. And as she points out, whether it's Bitcoin or CBDC, a private element, they're building it right now. It's important to recognize that if you can recognize that he's still lying to you, because it is a lie, there's no way he does not see that he's lying about that, about the COVID shot. How else do you make sense of this? Trying to drive you into a position where this is going to be profitable for him at the very least, but on top of that, the larger agenda. I know you don't want to believe that's who he is. Maybe he's being played. Isn't that the argument of laugh time? So if that's possible, then you should consider it, right? And I will also talk about Derek's recent article, Meet the Spyware Companies that preparing to unleash their tech during Trump's second term. And it goes into the reality of overlap with Israel and the many startups, another Israeli intelligence-connected firm that are building out in this country right now in the spyware field. 50% of all of it is run by Israeli tech companies. So let's finish with the conversation of the larger overarching discussion. Now, we had an IMA panel where recently, I'm sorry. I'm skipping one thing. We're going to end with the conversation of his recent article. Derek, it's called You Can't Hide. Direct quote, by the way. Elon Musk and SpaceX are helping U.S. intelligence build the world's largest spy satellite network. Before we get to that, same point, though, in the conversation of his cabinet. Just a few points I want to make about this before we finish with Derek's article. And what we were just talking about is another article about the spyware, right? And so the connective point here is about the idea of not just the Israeli overlap, which is prevalent in every person he's picked, but also the fact that we're talking about, well, three things: not being an outsider. We're going to show you that next. But these are just this is the oligarch. You're literally watching the deep state populate in front of you. And in fact, going back to Matt Ehret's points, he theorized, he hypothesized this is where we were going, that the real ruling structure was wanting to step back out into the light. Remember, we talked about this. I mean, I think this is an important point that we should not skip over. One of the main things we were talking about with Matt and his many articles for TLAV is that historically there is a ruling structure that goes back to feudal times and so on, like bloodlines and whatever else. And the point is clearly that at some point, from pressure from individuals or by design, that they folded this into some kind of, it went from bloodline, God-given divine right to rule, into the idea of, however you want to frame it, it was in sections. It slowly changed, but now into the idea that we're somehow choosing them, right? That they convinced us that we were the ones picking the person that was going to rule. And even then you can still see these families of politicians. The point is, he argues that they've recognized that it's time for them through technocracy to step back out into the light. I'm telling you guys, if there's never been a better example of what we're looking at, or of that, than what we're looking at. And this being the point right here. Experts stunned as Trump picks 9th billionaire for the top job. And it's not just about billionaires, but it's about the Zionist overlap. It's about the technocracy. And it's really just about whatever direction they're driving in. And those are the people stepping out to tell you that they're the outsiders, when literally they are the definition of the insiders of the deep state. Now, this point overlapping with the last point, showing you that we're bringing together all of this stuff into this current administration. And we discussed this in the IMA panel. Cabinet picks, policy proposals. We go over a lot of it. Not everything, obviously. There's a lot to talk about. But the 9th billionaire, I mean, please, just on that one point alone, explain for me how that demonstrates being the outsider. Wasn't one of the main points that Trump Republicans were pushing during the election was to look at all the billionaires that are supporting Kamala, even though Forbes broke both them down. And that's actually this article here that Derek wrote as well. That both sides were backed by this, like, billionaires, Zionists, technocrats, like almost the same. But think about that. Now it's not worth that. No one's going to acknowledge it now because they're going to be the good guy billionaires fight, which is certainly possible. I hope you're right. But if you go through and look at them, it's a who's who of technocrat, Zionist controllers, deep state monsters. It is the swamp. And even The Guardian wrote about it. Trump assembling U.S. cabinet of billionaires worth combined $340 billion. I just can't believe anybody's falling for this. Mike Lee, a U.S. Senator for Utah, who's been unabashedly, praising Elon and Trump, and just, I've already caught many misinformation or lies, if you will, coming from this account. But it says, in a meeting today with Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy and Speaker Johnson, because Johnson's, who they all called Rhino a second ago, now it's just funny how just whoever's on our side suddenly works. Democrats or not, on that point, actually. Again, we should laugh about how many Democrats, all of them, it seems, are leading the administration. I find it interesting that the Republicans, who will be the quickest to point out a possible conspiracy theory, are not willing to consider whether this is the Democrats that you hate so much who are taking control of your party. I honestly don't even think that's what's happening, but I think it's funny that you can see every single one of them, in the core circle are Democrats who just decided to become Republicans. I just think it's interesting, and why it just shows you the willful ignorance. You just block. I'm going to, cover my eyes. I don't want to see it. But it goes on to say Elon and Vivek referred to the fact, this is what they're all discussing in this important meeting, that unelected bureaucrats now make most federal law, bombshell, and control much of our economy. We've been stripped of the benefits of a constitutional republic. Did you just get done telling us it was a democracy? Either way, the point is, duh. You mean literally you guys right there on screen? Now, other than Johnson, we're talking about literally unelected bureaucrats. You're talking about people that got picked and not elected to be in a position, by the way, that doesn't even exist yet. And they're literally sitting there acting like, this is what I keep showing you. These two have made a career. And I mean it like more of metaphorical sense. Like they have made a career since the election timeframe of pointing at problems that the establishment created and using those problems to usher in a new problem. That's my opinion of the latter half of it. But I mean, unelected bureaucrats is what Trump has been picking. It's what the billionaires that he's aligning in his cabinet. And yes, that's obviously what anybody with a brain has been calling out for a very long time. We don't live in a democracy. We don't live in a republic. We live in an oligarchy. We live in a situation where both sides of the paradigm have been allowing unelected bureaucrats to choose what happens. So I just think if you're right, I will be happy about that. If they mean this and they do change it. But I just think it's a little bit absurd that we're watching billionaires lie on this platform, technocrats and Zionists, and unelected bureaucrats sit up and tell us about how we need to stop unelected bureaucrats. That should be kind of comical, I think, but hopefully we can see through it. Most people don't seem to be in the context of the partisans. Dr. June Ruby highlights one of the cabinet picks, which is exactly what we're talking about. Handpicking Jared Kushner's father as an ambassador to France is exactly what he was just talking about. Now, not in the sense of picking laws, but ultimately unelected bureaucrats, especially a wild Zionist that is one removed from Israel itself. Trump named Jared Kushner's father, Charles Kushner, as the new ambassador to France, the same Charles Kushner that Trump pardoned for hiring a prostitute to seduce his brother-in-law so he could blackmail his sister. He was also convicted of tax evasion, witness tampering, and illegal campaign contributions. Getting tired of the win yet? She says, okay, these are the villains, guys. These are the swamp. On top of that, here is a live broadcast from Benny Johnson saying Trump doubles down on support for Kash Patel, Hegseth. Both will be confirmed, it says. I love it. Nobody could know this. Joe Biden doomed. These people are these cartoons in my mind. The point is that, yes, he is doubling down on some of these picks that are terrifying. People that are very clear Zionist and at the expense of American rights. And people that I argue, Hegseth in particular, who probably won't be confirmed. But they're saying this because a senator said so. The point is the confirmation part is going to happen. And that's going to be, I think these are people largely are designed to not be picked, I think, for certain reasons. In any case, Kash Patel is concerning as hell. As even Sally Agris points out, what an effing joke. As he goes on and says, wake up and prioritize Israel. But America first, right? But prioritize Israel. But America first. Oops, those things are contradictory. Don't think about it, though, because then you're anti-MAGA or against the Trump objectives. Just willful blindness. But of course, here's Zionist Laura Loomer. We all know Kash Patel is great. The issue will be whether they'll try to block his confirmation. Of course you think he's great because he's a Israel first, America second politician. And again, I just said, sure, Patel's great if you blindly support Israel over American rights, as we know you do, Laura. Here is the Blaze Media, another blind sycophant for the Republican Party and Trump in particular. 4 major cover-ups that Kash Patel would expose as FBI director. Gee, is it going to be JFK, 9/11, the COVID scam? Nope. It's going to be the Epstein list, which I guarantee will never happen, not in full because they're all on it, or the idea of January 6th pipe bombs, because we know that's a huge point. I mean, these are things that would be interesting to know, but not January 6th, but the pipe bombs, or deleted text message of January 6th, or Russiagate. Are you kidding me? Does anybody need Russiagate broken down for them? This is a diversion. You're being played. If you're going to talk about somebody heading the FBI, how about first we talk about getting rid of the whole thing, which is what you promised to do. But that doesn't seem to be the case with everything that's happening. But you're going to tell us you're going to break down the Epstein list. I mean, most of these things are already out there for you to see. We already understand what the pipe bomb lies were, the idea of this is like the Vegas thing where they drip out information. I don't know why people who are honest about this but still want to believe in them are not the first to go, well, okay, well, that's crazy. That's what you care about? Because you know it. It feels wrong, and you know it. Corey Lynn of Corey's Digs has an ongoing Trump picks that you can check out. It's her continuing ongoing list of the Trump announcements and eventually when they get picked. So it's a good thing to keep to the side. And Larkin Rose points out the thing I mentioned earlier, the idea of BRICS, right? So is this what an outsider fighting to fight against the deep state would do? You know, the deep state control with the dollar domination, and the petrodollar. We can all acknowledge that is part of what we're talking about, right? I know conservatives would agree if it was outside of Trump's support. The reality being that all of this stuff represents the problem. And not necessarily that just the larger idea of just the fiat currency, the way it's used to sanction. The point is, this is a problem. And the Bitcoin or cryptocurrency was at least arguably put forward in order to challenge that. Now they've absorbed that. They're using that to bolster the dollar. And here's what he says. The idea that BRICS countries are trying to move away from the dollar while we stand by and watch is over. We require a commitment from these countries that they will neither create a new currency nor back any other one to replace the mighty US dollar. It's just, this is authoritarian monster stuff, guys. Like, first of all, what right do you have to tell anybody what they can do? These are foreign countries. They can choose, and his point is, now the argument, of course, from the supporters will be, well, they can do it, there'll be consequences. What do you mean consequences? First of all, the 100% tariff is a tax on you, moron, not everybody else. It will affect Americans more than anybody, other than maybe the interest of the corporations that would suffer from not being able to sell those. But realize the U.S. is just one market. And in some cases, it's the biggest market, but nonetheless, it does not remove, it hurts you, no matter what. And it's just incredible that we can't recognize that. The bottom line, though, is that is coercive measures because a country decides to do what's right for them. The dollar is what allows the Trump administration or any other administration to coercively use that control to sanction, to start. I mean, everything they do is illegitimate and illegal. It's the dominance they use, and they use it against everybody, including their own allies, like he's doing right here. He even says, tariffs and should expect to say goodbye to selling to the U.S. wonderful U.S. economy. They can go find another sucker. There's no chance that the BRICS will replace the U.S. dollar in international trade. Well, there's very clearly a chance. Now, in my mind, it's just another rising control structure. But it says, and any country that tries to should wave goodbye to America. Any country. So one of the allies. Well, you're no longer now. It's belligerent. This is the might makes right. This is the last thing we should want. We are being driven into our own demise, and people are so blinded by partisan exuberance they can't see what's happening. And as Larkin says, gee whiz, it's almost as if Trump cares more about using his power to protect the Federal Reserve and the banking racket than he does about America's prosperity. Who would have thought? Finally, somebody honest and objective who can point out what is clearly happening. I don't care if it's Biden or Kamala or Trump or anybody else. Anybody saying that is not your friend. He is, in fact, not, I mean, look, you can look at it from multiple things. That kind of action is going to cause more problem for you, more problem for the country, more problem for this economy. But on top of that, you're being a dictator. Because look, what you're saying is not just that you can't use any other currency, you can't create a new currency. He says, we'll require you basically a commitment from countries that they will neither create a new one nor back any other currency. In what world do you think that is something you have the right to do? That's called not just being the policeman of the world, that's called being the dictator of the world. And yet they love to pretend otherwise. Any country out there can decide to use what they think is in their interest, even if it's at the expense of the United States. But you see, in their mind, that is something they can't allow. That is not what we pretend we are. Never have been. And I'll include this video at 7 minutes, but High Impact Flicks goes through the same thing. Trump just issued a serious threat to the entire world in order to rescue the dollar from certain doom. You'd think that most of the people on the Republican side of this would be arguing something different than that, but I just don't get it. And lastly, on this segment, before we finish with Derek's article, this is the kind of thing that it's very, very clear. Trump asked to dismiss Georgia election interference, rather his lawyer does, in the Georgia election interference case because of presidential immunity. God, it must be nice to be in that category, right? Where you can just kind of resign and not have criminal accountability, or have something, whether you think it's criminal or not, have something that you're being charged for as a crime, and then getting elected as president and going, can I just not have that happen now? Now that I'm president, I'm immune from, it's just crazy to me. I guess even arguably the point is he is president, but I don't know if it works as currently immune from crimes you may be committed, or like the point is, what if you murdered somebody? You get elected and then it turns out you killed a guy. It all breaks out. Are you then immune from prosecution? I don't see how that makes sense. But either way you look at it, it's very dishonest. You're just hoping to get out of a crime. But I mean, obviously the other side of the argument is whether you think the charges are even legitimate, which is a fair conversation. But my point is from a nonpartisan view that this is what government does. They abuse their power. Simple, guys. I wish people could see it more like that. Now, lastly, this does very much concern me. I'm going to go through this article in general. I think it's important. I'm going to be interviewing Derek in the next week to talk about this and the other article in general, give us more insight on this. But the title, You can't hide, which again is a direct quote from somebody citing what they're working on. And this is what Elon Musk is working on. And also important to highlight, I'll say right from the beginning, multiple contracts for this exact program were conducted under the Biden administration. I hope that should break down some of these illusions. Explain for me, if the Democrats are fighting him and they all hate Elon, trying to destroy him, why Biden's government would allow a contract for him to profit. Why? Because they're all working for the same agenda. And this is one part of it. It says Starlink is what is known as a satellite internet constellation, which is operated by Starlink Services, an international telecommunications company that is wholly owned by Musk's aerospace company, SpaceX. Starlink satellites were first launched by SpaceX in 2019. Now reportedly provide internet access to people in more than 100 countries. Now, obviously, you could argue there's a benefit there to people that didn't have it before. Maybe it's cheaper, but I worry about what is being created with this. A choke point of say, or possible surveillance dynamics that are overlap with Israel, the current U.S. deep state dynamic. The most recent numbers on Starlink satellites say the satellite constellation consists of more than 700 small satellites in low Earth orbit. SpaceX has plans for 12,000 satellites over the coming years. Starlink is said to have more than 4 million worldwide subscribers. SpaceX has become a key partner in the U.S. military intelligence apparatus and is helping them build a massive surveillance grid. So if we can prove, as we can, that this was happening during Biden's administration, how do you make sense of that? Other than to realize that both sides have the same agenda. It's only going to continue under Trump's administration. It's already going. It says in September 2023, Bloomberg reported that SpaceX had received its first contract, all the links are in here, from the U.S. Space Force to, quote, provide customized satellite communications for the military under SpaceX's new Star Shield program. To move, Bloomberg noted, the move, it noted, would, quote, extend Elon Musk's role as a defense contractor for the Biden administration and now the Trump administration. It says Star Shield will offer service to the military for 1 year using SpaceX's existing Starlink satellites. Air Force spokeswoman Ann Stefanik told Bloomberg that the contract provides the Star Shield end-to-end service via the Starlink constellation, user terminals, ancillary equipment, network management, and other related services. That is to say that the U.S. military and intelligence will be piggybacking off of Starlink satellites, which are being sold to the average person as a convenient and fast way to access the internet. Now, even right there, you could argue that maybe, let's just say Elon Musk and Starlink are completely unaware, and yet the government that clearly will do whatever it wants might use that to spy on you. I mean, I don't see why they wouldn't. They're doing it with everything else anyway. My point, I think, or my opinion, would be obviously that he is aware of that, but the point is that they could do that whether he is or not. So however you like to make that make sense for you, as long as you're willing to consider the point, I'm fine with. Realize that I think that's what's going on. The pursuit of military contracts is not a new feature of SpaceX business model. In 2002, it was reported that SpaceX had contracted with an undisclosed U.S. intelligence customer. More recently, Musk's Starlink contracted with the U.S. Department of Defense for an undisclosed amount to provide Starlink communication to the Ukrainian military. Now, again, is this an outsider, right? Isn't this exactly what conservatives or Republicans would call the deep state? And yet they're working with him. They let him buy Twitter. It's very easy to break down how this floated narrative that would generally is accepted by the partisans. It's just not true. It can't be. But it says in February 2024, the Wall Street Journal reported on the existence of yet another contract between SpaceX and the U.S. government. The previously unknown 2021 contract was worth a whopping $1.8 billion and related to the secretive Star Shield satellite constellation. The U.S. government agency contracting with SpaceX was unlisted in the documents viewed by the Wall Street Journal. The size and secrecy, it writes, of the agreement illustrate a growing independence between SpaceX, a dominant force in the space industry, and the national security establishment. You know, the deep state or whatever. I mean, honestly, the reality is it's a nebulous concept that everybody has a different opinion about. Again, it really means, as it's also called, the shadow government, just the unelected, never-changing power structure. I shouldn't say never changing, but, just they're stagnant. They're not being voted in and out or whatever that illusion is. So you can see, as even they're writing, very clearly it illustrates a growing dominant force in the industry of SpaceX and the national security establishment. I find that to be a little bit contradictory to what they're claiming is going on. The Wall Street Journal also reported that Gwen Shotwell, president and COO of SpaceX, acknowledged there was, quote, very good collaboration between the intelligence community and SpaceX. And the same intelligence community, we're told, is going after both of them, right? In March, Reuters spoke to 5 sources with inside knowledge of a classified contract between SpaceX and an undisclosed U.S. agency, intelligence agency. According to these sources, SpaceX is building a network of spy satellites with none other than the U.S. National Reconnaissance Office, the NRO, as part of the previously reported $1.8 billion contract that they kept very secret. You should be asking why, especially since this is supposed to be, spy satellites, but the surface narrative is that we're all fighting for, why is this kept secret from you if the argument is to use them against bad guys overseas? I'm sure you can connect those dots. If you've never heard of the NRO, I forgive you because it's something that is kept secret and historically was completely undisclosed until, I forget the date, 1990 something. But it says these same sources told Reuters that if the program is successful, it would, quote, significantly advance the U.S. government and military ability to rapidly find targets almost anywhere on the planet. Is that what we all want? Even if you believe Trump will have this power, what happens when Democrats have control? If that's the, no, I was laughing when I make that argument. It seems so flimsy to pretend like you can't think 4 years ahead. Bottom line, though, is anyone in the world could have this. We're talking about a structure that has nothing to do with who you're voting in and what the current government looks like. That's the reality of these power structures. And you're allowing these people to build something out that is, we're talking about dystopian government, technocratic future stuff here, guys. And it's literally being built out in front of you. And we can't stop talking about these partisan games. It says, by April, the report appeared to be confirmed after it was announced that SpaceX would partner with longtime military contractor Northrop Grumman on the classified spy satellite system. The classified project was being developed by the National Reconnaissance Office. The NRO is an intelligence agency within the U.S. Department of Defense, which designs, builds, launches, and operates the reconnaissance satellites for the government, spying. The agency was founded in 1961, but its existence was classified secret until 1992. Here's a little breakdown of that. It says the NRO provides satellite intelligence to several government agencies, including the NSA, the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency, the NGA, and the Defense Intelligence Agency, the DIA. And it's funny, I bet most people don't even know some of these. And also recognize that there's probably 15 more we've never even heard of. Just like back in 1990, we didn't know this one existed either. That's how out of control this is. And I'm arguing these things are governments in and of themselves at this point. Bottom line, the outsider fighting the deep state is literally building deep state spy satellites with the government that is being contracted by the NRO that provides surveillance for the NSA. And every other, and the DIA and everything. It's crazy to me how we cannot see how clear this is. In May, SpaceX carried out its first mission to help the NRO launch satellites into space. The headline, SpaceX launches first batch of new spy satellites for NRO. It's literally the headline. Tells you everything you need to know. The number of satellites launched into orbit by the NRO and SpaceX were not disclosed to the public. But I want to play you this I've shown before. And really, this really does unnerve me. Seeing just since 2019 what the space, at least as we know, for all we know, it's far, far worse than this, but this is what we're being shown of all the satellites in space from 2019 to today, with apparently the majority of them being Starlink. So the kind of dumb things from the whatever TikTok is covering the date, but you can see this is 2020 right now, and it goes from 2020 to 2024. How did that not scare you? My God. This really is terrifying, right? And so think about this, is the idea is one kind of happening rapidly without even really an acknowledgement of this. How many of those have weapons on them? I know we're supposed to pretend there's treaties, but they don't follow any treaties. How long until something like that's used? How long till that false flag breaks out? I mean, my God, I don't know why this is not something that is more, I do know why, because it's being generally ignored by most of the corporate media. And by the way, you can look this up. This is not a secret. Like these, you could find these on space Starlink websites. I mean, this is where we currently are. So keeping that in what we're talking about in mind with what this is, the amount of control that is. I mean, think about the idea of what that shows. When we're talking about spying in particular, if they wait till we get to the worst part. If they can look everywhere at any moment, which I argue is probably already happening, what further can this go? Why would it be hard to wrap your mind around real-time audio anywhere in the world? How long until you are no longer private on anything? I mean, realize even before this point, we've already talked about, and this again, these kind of points are quickly reflexively dismissed by people that don't want to consider it, but we have gone over peer-reviewed science, even World Economic Forum presentations where they're talking about using energy or using any number of things to read your thoughts. It's not the thing of the future. It's happening already. Using Wi-Fi signals to be able to 3D map rooms. And this stuff is all real. So ask yourself what else is going on. Back to this point, what Elon Musk is literally building around you right now. Or at least whoever is building it, they're making it look like he's doing it. I mean, I have a huge skeptical point about whether he is even the person behind all this stuff. Either way, this is what's going on. It says, while the public has been watching with joy and awe as Elon Musk and SpaceX bring America into the space race of the next generation, that's kind of the general mainstream media framing and mainstream alternative media framing of all this. Musk is actually launching spy satellites aboard the SpaceX Falcon 9 rockets. Right? So one thing is happening is they're launching these and they're covering it as some kind of other experiment, but you're not being told that it has spy satellites for the government that we all pretend he's fighting, or other things that I argue are probably also happening. But it says the latest partnership between SpaceX and the NRO came in October, when the company was awarded contracts for 9 launches under the National Security Space Launch Phase 3 Lane 1 program. And this was $733.5 million contract for 7 missions for the Space Development Agency. There's so many of these 3-letter acronyms and agencies. And 2 for the NRO, which were projected to launch in late 2025 and 2026. Again, so there's a contract being conducted during Biden's administration that gives the benefit of the accomplishment of it to Trump. Important to think about. Some supporters of Musk might argue that he is simply being a smart businessman and cashing in on U.S. government money while remaining agnostic about how the technology supplies is deployed. Not only is such an excuse a cop-out and an attempt at absolving Musk and his cohorts of personal responsibility, it is utterly ignorant to deny the danger in supplying the world's largest military with an even greater ability to spy on the world. And obviously far more than that. And in both ways, not just the largest military, but the government most responsible for the death of people around the world, of occupying territory, but not even just spying. Again, actual deployment of kinetic munitions is certainly possible, or any number of other things we could talk about. Again, experimentation. I mean, guys, this goes into so many other realms. Hypothetically, obviously, my point is the one we can prove right now is the idea of spy satellites. But it's just as possible that these things could have anything else. And again, how long until that's just the case? I mean, historically, that's how these things go, especially if it's in the interest of the military. And it says, take a look at the words of Christopher Scalise, the director of the NRO. To understand the danger posed by Starshield, and this is where it gets terrifying, Scalise reports directly to both the Director of National Intelligence and the Secretary of Defense. In October, Scalise spoke at an event hosted by the Center for Strategic and International Studies, detailing how the NRO is planning to use the satellites provided by businesses like SpaceX, predominantly SpaceX, obviously, based on the amount that are there. Quote, from last June to December of this year, we'll have probably launched 100 satellites. So we are going from the demo phase to the operational phase. That's scary to me, where we're really going to be able to start testing all of this stuff, who knows what that really encapsulates, out in a more operational way. So now we're going from the experimental stage to the real-time stage. We're going to roll this out in earnest. So if this isn't earnest now, I am terrified to find out what earnest looks like, or in a more operational way looks like. I mean, now this is the part. He says, what are they going to be doing? They are part of the proliferated architecture to go off and get us reasonably high resolution imagery of the Earth at a high rate of speed, Scalise says. In quotes, he says, now you can't hide because you're constantly being looked at. Why would anybody want that other than the government on you? Here's the actual clip. I think it's at, what was it? Let me see.
Hey, everybody.
I think it was 56. Oh, wait, let me double check. Hold on. 54:26.
So the answer is yes, they are NRO owned. If you mean it in the sense that is NRO going to be operating them, the answer.
So he being clear that the NRO we're discussing is the one in control of this, which is scary to me.
Is yes. And what are they going to be doing? They are part of the proliferated architecture to go off and get us reasonably high resolution imagery of the Earth at a high rate of speed.
At a high rate of speed. This is the part about you can't hide.
Yeah,
we're constantly, this idea of persistence where you can.
So he repeats it right there too. But the point is that in the larger conversation, he says it 2 different times earlier. That's just the best one to play right there. And you can watch it for yourself where he goes, now you can't hide. And she just references, well, that's that part about you can't hide. He goes, yeah, you can't hide. It's like, gosh darn it. Just, it's incredible to me how this is not, terrifying to some people. And he says, however, Scalise warned that with such an influx of satellites in orbit and the heaps of data coming in, humans won't be able to keep up. Thus, and here becomes the worst part of all, he claimed the NRO will get help from artificial intelligence. Gee, I wonder if Musk will have a part to play in that. It says, no doubt Musk will be ready to offer some assistance in the form of data gleaned from Grok that you happily provide on Twitter. The AI bot integrated into Twitter, which has gathered billions of data points from the platform's hundreds of users, millions of users, from the platform's hundreds of millions of users. Operating a proliferated architecture means that it's no longer possible, he writes, to go off and for an individual sitting at a control center to say, I know what the satellite is doing. He goes, we have to have the machines to go off and help us there. We need artificial intelligence, machine learning, and automated processes to help us do that. It says the relationship between the NRO and Musk, SpaceX, and Starshield is obviously growing by the day. Musk is increasingly allied with the U.S. military and intelligence apparatus and further entrenching himself and his companies as part of the military-industrial complex. Starshield is part of SpaceX's Special Programs Group, and the vice president of SPG is retired Air Force General Terrence O'Shaughnessy. In 2020, after a 39-year career with the U.S. Air Force, Terrence O'Shaughnessy retired and then later became a senior advisor to Elon Musk on matters regarding SpaceX. Now, certainly that could be the easy way to look at it, or maybe you can say that this was something, like when you talk about intelligence, a lot of times this is what it will look like. Somebody left that field and started working for the private industry, or not actually, or they simply left to continue the operation under the guise of a civilian asset. Like that's how this stuff can work. Now, I'm not saying that's what's happening. Could be, though. Consider that. And it says, prior to joining SpaceX, O'Shaughnessy served with the Air Force, United States Northern Command, NORTHCOM, and, of course, NORAD, North American Aerospace Defense Command. Not a small thing, where he was responsible to the President and Secretary of Defense. O'Shaughnessy, who was reportedly responsible for the DoD supplying 16,000 medical personnel during the U.S. military national COVID response. Now, so he's part of NORAD, answers directly to the President of Secretary of Defense. Secretary and the Secretary, excuse me, I can't talk. The President and the Secretary of Defense. Then decides to retire and join SpaceX to continue the technocratic overtake. But it says O'Shaughnessy called for, quote, an initiative sensing grid from undersea to maritime to terrestrial to air to a space-based layer, which can ultimately lead to a system of systems. Now, this is before he left the military. That's important to highlight. But does that sound familiar to you? Does what he's saying there sound familiar? I'm trying to find it right now. That's so frustrating. I have these all lined up. I was trying to time that perfectly, and I can't find it now. There it is. So, what I just read a intuitive sensing grid from undersea to maritime to terrestrial to air to space. Well, it sounds like something, doesn't it?
And this system is in place, and I will tell you, it will be on land, it will be on sea, it will be in air. We will have a proper tracking system. Finally complete the biometric entry-exit visa tracking system.
Yeah, sure sounds like something I've heard before. And it goes on to say, however, he emphasized that this grid is brought together in a resilient, redundant architecture where the military can, quote, effectively command and control the, quote, networked capabilities. They will have established an all-domain sensor network where anything can sense anything. That does not sound like a world I want to live in. That sounds like a 1984 technocratic dystopia, which is what we're all trying to tell you. They're literally building out around you while you're high-fiving about what Trump said that day. Now, just to be clear, as much as the current says, it can feel like you're attacking one side in this because that's the current power structure. My point is that if it was Biden doing this, we'd be saying the same thing. And the Democrats, I would be saying, well, you're high-fiving what Biden said he did that day. It's the same point. I just hope the partisans can see, well, I guess it doesn't matter to them because they ultimately want to believe in the one person. But I hope you know my opinion is that's not the majority. I think it's the minority today. But either way, I hope you can take the time to stand back and recognize that whether you think they're doing it on purpose or not, it's very clear where this is going. Interestingly enough, the NRO has a history of some pretty shady activity, which this is just completely what jumped into my mind. I asked Eric about this, and I'll say it when I'm done reading this, but something about what this outlines stands out to me as a very specific entity. And realize we're talking about the infiltration of the government, which probably just gave it away. But the point is, the secret agency's secret budgets lost billions, officials say, was a New York Times headline that read in January 1996. That's, remember, when the NRO became exposed. The story detailed how the NRO, which had only been publicly acknowledged by the U.S. government 4 years earlier, had, quote, lost track of more than $2 billion in classified money in 1995. Oh, I'm sorry, it was 1992. So 96, this is when the article is talking about it. It says one Senate Intelligence Committee aide blamed the lost funds on the NRO's, quote, own internal secrecy. More than $1 billion in funds would eventually be found. $2 billion they've lost. Sounds like something else we keep hearing about, right? Like the Pentagon lost funds. I mean, this is how the government operates, guys. This is just a very provable and obvious example of one part of, I think, is how the whole system works. Again, they eventually, quote, find $1 billion to fill that gap. But it says critics of the Reconnaissance Office said today, this is a quote from the article from 1996, that the money had been hidden in several rainy day accounts that secretly solidified into a, quote, slush fund. Guys, that's just how your government works. That's not different than today. All the black operation, the black budget, black money, it's everywhere. Most of the money that goes flowing overseas is going somewhere else than what you think it is. But it says, interestingly, the report states that the NRO, quote, operates in the deepest secrecy more so than any government agency. Think about that and realize who's working with this group. The Times describes the NRO as more of a set of interlocking, compartmentalized groups operating mostly in the dark about what each other is working on. As of 1996, the NRO was running a $28 billion a year black budget, or classified above top secret, for military and intelligence programs. Guys, that's 1996. Can you imagine what's going on today? Now, first off, how does this not just represent the deep state? Completely black budget, above top secret, compartmentalized. They don't even know what each other is doing. Or you could realize that, or I would argue that there's something else driving that. Again, just this my opinion here, but it stands out as overlapping with exactly what this group would do. 1 month before the terrorist attacks of September 11th, 2021 or 2001, former Air Force intelligence officer Brian B. Reagan was arrested by FBI agents at Dulles International Airport for stealing classified material from the NRO. Apparently, they said he wanted to sell it to foreign countries. A decade later, in 2012, McClatchy DC, as a platform, a outlet, released an investigation detailing how the NRO was accused of pressuring its professional polygraphers to obtain intimate details on the private lives of thousands of job applicants and employees. Quote, the National Reconnaissance Office is so intent on extracting confessions of personal or illicit behavior that officials have admonished polygraphers who refused to go after them and rewarded those who did, sometimes with cash bonuses, said the report. The confessions collected by the polygraphers include drug use, child abuse, suicide attempts, depression, and sexual preferences. The NRO records the polygraph sessions and stores them in a private database. McClatchy, remember who's working with this group right now. McClatchy reviewed hundreds of documents, internal memos, and emails, and found that the NRO was pushing ethical and potentially legal boundaries by establishing a database, which tracks the number of confessions per applicant or employee, and then uses the number of confessions extracted by polygraphers to grade them in annual performance reviews. The NRO was also accused of requiring employees and applicants to take multiple polygraph tests in an effort to obtain details about a wide range of personal behavior. You're starting to get the point that I'm getting at. You know who else acts exactly like this? Bizarrely, while the NRO was reportedly interested in knowing the criminal background of its current and future employees, the agency did not turn over information to law enforcement when a contractor they worked with admitted to molesting a child. The contractor was a substitute teacher in Escondido, California, and admitted to abusing a third-grade student in 2005. Yeah, this isn't the 80s, guys. It's 2005 or some long time ago. McClatchy reported that the NRO never contacted the Escondido Police Department or the school district where the man had been employed. Finally, in December, before we get to that, actually. So, my point on this is this seems strikingly similar to what we've seen the Israeli intelligence apparatus do in every single field we've seen them work in. On top of that, all the groups they seem to fund and work through, and I guess this is not just the Israeli, the same with the U.S. government as well, but I think that's why they intertwine, is groups that they fund to work against their adversaries, like, for example, the MEK. Now, admittedly, at least as I understand it, it's not a group that they created, but it's a group that both the Israeli and U.S. intelligence apparatus have funded and cultivated in order to try to supplant the current Iranian government. And these are maniacs. This is a perfect example of a radical extremist element that they just ignore because they want to work with them, like the moderate rebels or, Saudi Arabia, the government anyway. And the point is that if you look at the MEK and look at how they conduct themselves, you might as well read from this article. Exactly the same thing about sexual preferences, about forcing confessions. And guys, look at what the Israeli government just has been doing nonstop, and it's done long before October 7th. Now, this is just my opinion. It's just an overlap. Very well could just be what they've done because they want to, or because they did it because they recognize what Israel's doing. The point is, it could be no connection. But I do find it interesting with what we see, how invasive, how infiltrative, how much they have infiltrated the Israeli government into this government. And you wonder, at what point did that truly happen? Is this just simply their as Netanyahu says 20, 30 years ago, we controlled the U.S. Congress. We divide, fight them against each other. He said it many times. Maybe this is why. The most secret agency in all of it. You see what I'm saying? Like, this is very strange to me. And this is what Elon Musk is working with to build a spy satellite network that can look anywhere and you can't hide. Now, it says, finally, in December 2013, the NRO launched a reconnaissance satellite known as USA 247. NRO launched 39 or NROL 39, while the launch of the satellites would usually go unnoticed by the general public, NROL 39 generated controversy after the Office of the Director of National Intelligence tweeted a logo of the satellite. The logo featured an animated octopus wrapping its tentacles around the world with the phrase, "Nothing is beyond our reach." That's December 5, 2023. Why would they do that? Now, I have the mind that those things aren't accidental. Or why would they, they would have deleted it. So clearly this is something I think was, there's a lot of ways where they use something that you would be upset with because it's like we're dealing with today. They divulge something that they would otherwise hide from you to get you to react in a way that justifies the next step. It's constant. But that's just my opinion. I mean, it could just be this guy did it by accident. Who knows? I don't think that. But so they reveal this. And again, nothing is beyond our reach. Now it says, under Elon Musk is a technocrat, not a hero. It says, with a full understanding of the history of the National Reconnaissance Office, the Starshield program, and the extensive relationship between SpaceX and the military intelligence networks, we can clearly state that Elon Musk is a tool for the military-industrial complex. Now, you could argue without his knowledge or that he's agnostic about it all, but either way, you're building out the thing you claim you're fighting. Even further, it says Elon Musk is a technocrat, a proponent of technocracy, a system wherein management of governments is handled by technical experts, often involving technological focused solutions. Now, I'd argue that's a very, very kind way to frame that. Now, you could argue that's one version of this. I think where we can see the clear embodiment of technocracy today, it's much more darker than that, in my opinion. Either way, it's a fair general description. The problem, though, is we're watching this play out without your knowledge while you're being told you're voting for, like, we're watching this technocratic control structure. That's actually what I recently wrote about, right? That the technocratic coup we're watching. I mean, we're watching this play out, and we're watching little trial balloons happen all over the place. And they're even floating the idea of these freedom cities, which is the same conversation. Now, it says, when we examine the world of 2024, we clearly see the signs of technocratic influence. For example, we can see this influence in the wealthiest companies and the most influential CEOs. These individuals are running companies that have amassed large amounts of financial wealth, as well as unfathomable amounts of digital data on all of their customers. From Jeff Bezos at Amazon, Bill Gates at Microsoft, Mark Zuckerberg at Facebook, lesser-known names at Google and Apple, and, of course, Elon Musk, Tesla, SpaceX, Twitter, we can see the technocratic ideology. In fact, Elon Musk has assigned himself the title of Techno King at Tesla, a term similar to the technocrats' Technate King. How do you miss these overlaps? He's literally telling you what he's doing. These men and their colleagues in various technological industries wield immense power through their companies, wealth, and cultural influence. These individuals have enough money, resources, and connections to shape elections, steal them, if you will, geoengineer climate, cause dips in the stock market, to name just a few examples. They are the technocrat class of 2024. Elon Musk is perhaps the most infamous technocrat who is now working directly with the President Trump-elect. He has advocated for implanting chips in human brains, transhumanism, turned Twitter into an everything app, similar to China's WeChat, merging with AI, and now is working directly with the U.S. military and intelligence to develop a classified spy satellite network. On the record, by the way. As he writes, what will it take to educate individuals who profess to love freedom and value privacy to reject Musk's Starlink? It's a good question. And I really do think that we're at a point now where there's a lot more reason, as a lot more evidence to push back on this. Now, let's get into, here, these are just the highlighted parts of that. To finish up in general, here's a couple of articles, and I want to overlap this again. So the whole point is to bring this back to circle, like we try to do often in these shows, to the beginning points about whatever's going in the milk they're using, the translation of mRNA through the milk, the idea of what might be used, all these open possibilities. But first, to highlight just the point we were making, here's Bloomberg. Elon Musk wins Space Force contract for Starshield. Realize that's very clear. The link to this video, if you want to check that out itself. The link to the video where he's saying this, if you want to check out the guy from, what's his name, Scalise. And this just kind of blew me away. Like this is from 2023. And this is like the 5G dynamic where we know that they're not testing it. They admit they're not testing it. And we just go, okay, and we let it keep going. SpaceX Starlink internet satellites, quote, leak so much radiation that it's hurting radio astronomy, scientists say. Now, again, that doesn't mean that it's translating to you on Earth, but how many before that starts to happen? And maybe that's not possible. I don't know, but I think that's crazy to think about. There's got to be some level of byproduct there. I just don't know. I get the sense that in most cases, they never really care about the consequences of what might happen, especially the ones they don't even know are possible because they're not choosing to look. It worries me. Same point going into the overlap of this and coming from the article. The use of artificial intelligence to make the government more efficient, to help NROs spy on everything in the world, or whatever else they can fathom under the guise of, or it could be the guise, or the actual building out of this. This is from Digital Trends from August 2024. A modular supercomputer built to birth, scary part of the word, scary word to use, to birth AGI. artificial general intelligence could be online by next year. Hey, perfect time for Trump's technocratic overtake. And it says AI startup Singularity Net is set to deploy multi-level cognitive computing network in the coming months. It is designed to host and train with models that will form the basis of AGI, capable of matching, even potentially exceeding human cognition. Here we go, guys. I mean, again, it could be that these are all hype and it's never even possible, which is something we've considered. Or they want us, even if it is, that they want us to think they've gotten there so they can just give us, algorithmic data they input and claim it's AI telling us what to do. Or it is possible. It is happening. I mean, either way, this is the dystopian next step. Like, I don't understand how we don't realize how obviously this could go awry. Once you pass this point, and everybody's talked about this, you have an exponential increase. An artificial general intelligence that can exceed human cognition will go from that point to so far beyond we can even fathom in half a second, in whatever the time frame is, in a rapid scale because of exponential learning with the way that they can grow. And that means that we're at a point where suddenly, I mean, how long until they, like, out of every movie we've seen, go, oh, okay, these guys are the problem. Clearly, these people are the problem. And whether they sweep us all under the rug as humanity or identify that the governments are destroying our entire world, hopefully we get it right. Hopefully we don't even end up in that position. To realize that this is what they're driving you into. I hope I'm wrong. And then bringing it back to the larger conversation, the Internet of Bio Things is upon us. I discussed this on January 20th this year. And this is the point about the Internet of Bio Nano Things, the interface between the artificial intelligence, the biological processes, injections, and the idea of having like a smart dust overlap, something that is nanotech that can flow around everything that will be manipulated via whatever systems they're using. And if you think this is crazy, guys, this image right here is directly from their own peer-reviewed studies, from World Economic Forum discussions. This is not hypothetical. This is already in existence. They are telling you that's where we are. So when you see things like this, Science Girl shares this, a nanobot helping a sperm with motility issues. So next time they show you that big clunky thing and they go breaking, cutting edge, realize you're being played and they're literally dealing with things that are this small. Helping an egg, again, they could be lying, of course, but I'm of the mind this is what's going on. It says these metal helixes are so small they can completely wrap around the tail of a single sperm and assist it all the way along. This is just one example, guys. I mean, and yet we're pushing back on the idea that something might have been in there that we don't know about in regard to shots or whatever else, or spraying in the world. I mean, I'm going to play you some things right now that proves to you that this is already in your world. First, a quick clip from a symposium about 20 years ago. 10 years ago, the symposium discussing something 10 years before about what is already out there. God only knows where it is now.
Literally scatter this stuff like dust or embed it into a sheet of paper. This was commercially released 10 years ago. It's a tiny computer and it features data processing, data storage, wireless comms, and it's probably as close to the true smart dust vision from the early DARPA days as we've come so far. They're designed to harvest energy from the environment around them and to communicate via a mesh network.
Okay, so this is a symposium, and I've brought this up many times. Actually, I'll grab the original link for you so you can prove it for yourself, which we always should. What was it? Oh, yeah, MakerCon. There it is. So the point, first, before I come back to the actual screen, is, you can look at this, guys. I mean, this was 20 years ago they're talking about. The symposium was, I think, 2011. This is about 10 years before that. The Mu chip, that's a salt crystal you're looking at. And as I understand it, it's way smaller today. That is something you could blow in the air that will land on your skin. As he highlights, will use your own body's energy to actually be able to relay information. Two-way comms. DARPA designed. Not this one, but the one he's talking about next. Right here. And this is real time. This is a long time ago, in fact. Now, here is even a decade before that. Now, the time frame gets a little bit fuzzy in regard to when and how these things were deployed. The realization is a group called Dust Networks was doing this decades ago. And I've covered this extensively, and I'll give you the article, watch for yourself. This is, and by the way, you have to use the Wayback Machine to even find these things. Here's an image, or rather a video from that group that had a government contract that was using these for shipping lanes in the ocean. It's just like anything else, like dioxin. It's incredible. These things can be so easily demonstrated, and yet we act like we're not even sure where we are. This is where we've been. They're using this stuff to roll out what's coming next.
My name is Chris Piester, and I am the founder and chief technologist of Dust Networks. I got started in this business way back in the 90s when I coined the phrase smart dust to describe the vision of the future where wireless sensors become ubiquitous and improve the quality of all of our lives. Smart Mesh IP is a revolutionary new product that brings all of the benefits of reliability, security, and low power that we've developed for the industrial process automation market and brings that into the world of the Internet Protocol. So first and foremost, Smart Mesh IP is IP. We use the IPv6 Internet Protocol to send
So get it to avoid all the other stuff, just cut to the chase. I just want to show you the image he uses to demonstrate what they're doing. And realize, even at this time he's doing the video, this is not the 90s. This is while it's in real world example. Oh, maybe this is the wrong one. It serves the purpose of what he just said at the beginning there. There's another video, and I might just be going too fast. I think I did this last time, where it shows him giving you a demonstration about what it looks like, and he's basically just throwing what looks like sand in the air, you know? And the point is, as we've, you know what, I'll bring this one up too, and this will make the point even more clear. So here's the MakerCon point, or the discussion from 10 years ago. And again, they're about a 10-year-old thing they're talking about. But in this case, let's see. Was it this one? I think so. No, dang it. What was that called? I can't remember now. It was, so basically it was a Wells Fargo, or it was a bank that was creating nanotech smart dust, a patent around the idea of using that at an ATM. Gosh, I can't remember the name. I'll include it in the links before, the links after the show if I can remember what it's called. Let's see. Oops. That probably won't come up. Search for it. Oh, maybe it does. Yeah, I mean, this isn't the one I was looking at, but look at that. So this just pops up, and it's Wells Fargo too. 2016, system of methods that facilitate authenticating a user making a payment using microelectrical systems, or called MEMs. That's another, i.e. smart dust. Right there. I just think it's so wild how we can't be honest with ourselves. You know why? Partisan screamers. That's why. Partisan manipulators and the people manipulating them that keep us trapped in the mud and then scream at you when you point out that we're trapped because you're black-pilled or whatever. It's all right in front of you. And I'll include the show where we go over this in most of the stuff we discussed. January 22nd. Is smart dust already in use? Yes. And in the population? And was COVID-19 an attempted experimental next step? I think so. Now to end, I'll include this as well, so you have this patent. But I want to try to find that show. I'll include that too if I can. But to end, just a general point to overlap it with what we're saying overall. Don't forget, we already talked about this. It's being reported that Israel is testing all sorts of new weapons they can't recognize. I think we're at a stage where whether it's Zionists in Israel, whether it's Elon Musk and the NRO, there's all this stuff happening right now where we are being shuffled rapidly into something. And I think they're testing and trying to figure out, like, I think that just like with COVID-19, I think it became very clear that there was something they were trying to execute on a timeline that just did not happen. You guys can decide for yourself, but I think whether you come to the same conclusion that I do from this or not, the facts are there to be laid out, and the information shows you that we are not being led in the direction that they claim we are. God, that has to matter more than anything. I'm very concerned about how that comes together, and I'm worried about what we're seeing play out in front of us, mostly because I think a lot of this stuff is already happening. But I'll leave it there for today. I really hope this can be reached, or this can reach people, and that you guys will help this get reach and share it with other people. Make clips, tag me in it. I say that often, but very few people take me up on that, guys. If you care about this work and you want to pluck out part of the show, you guys can pluck the show out, put yourself on the screen, make comments about it. Hopefully not in a TikTok version way, but you know, I'll share it. You know what I mean? Like, the point is, it's not just about promoting this work, but it's about my work rather, but promoting the content. You know, and take what I'm talking about and just discuss it on your own. Include the link so people can show what we were talking about, but I'll happily share that. Just get this stuff out there. I am thoroughly convinced that whether, it's not just TLAV, but people in this field, and I argue like the IMA, like objective, nonpartisan entities, are being more suppressed than we realize. And it's not about being completely ignored, because that would be too obvious, but it's about making sure that these things never organically break out the way that we see things do, often when they shouldn't, often when it seems artificial. That's a whole different conversation, but all I hope is that you could take the time to get this reach however you can, because people just need to see this. That's all I really care about, is about changing where we are. That's, stopping people from being murdered overseas in the name of everyone here, or using your tax dollars. Now, tomorrow I'm going to be talking about foreign policy. I'll try to make that the focal point, but anything else that pops up, we'll cover what's going on and new developments in his administration, more Syria we're going to talk about in general. We'll talk about Lebanon, Gaza, more so than we did today, and anything else that pops up. So thank you for continuing to support this platform. As I mentioned earlier today, we'd have ridiculous costs coming in for all these lawsuits we're fighting. And I genuinely think it's about trying to suppress and stop what we're doing. I mean, I think it's pretty obvious based on the time frame and how it's worked out. And even the last thing I mentioned about how they responded, like almost exposing the fact that they wanted this to make it, even at their expense, end up being a financial detriment to me. I just think that's what law firm acts like that? It's absolutely obvious to me. But the point is, for no other reason than if you believe in the content and how we're doing this. If you believe in what we're doing and you support the work, then help us continue. That's all that really matters. All the rest of it is all noise. My point is that we're going through a lot of attacks and we need more support than ever. But I want you to do it because you believe in what we're doing and you believe in what we're trying to fight for. So thank you for tuning in. Thank you for sharing the work. I love you all. As always, question everything. Come to your own conclusions. Stay vigilant.
Let's also be clear. The future is not just happening. The future is built by us.
The whole idea that humans have, they have this soul or spirit and they have free will and nobody knows what's happening inside me. So whatever I choose, whether in the election or whether in the supermarket, this is my free will, that's over. Today, we have the technology to hack human beings on a massive scale. Everything is being digitalized. Everything is being monitored. In this time of crisis, you have to follow science.
Decarbonization of the economy.
Where are they traveling? How are they traveling? What are they eating? What are they consuming on the platform? So, individual carbon footprint tracker. Stay tuned. We don't have it operational yet, but this is something that we're working on.
My top recommendation, honestly, would be just to have a carbon tax.
It's often said that you should never allow a good crisis to go to waste, because a crisis is an opportunity to also do good reforms that in normal times people will never agree to. But in a crisis, you see, we have no chance. So let's do it. Surveillance. People could look back in 100 years and identify the coronavirus epidemic as the moment when a new regime of surveillance took over, especially surveillance under the skin, which I think is maybe the most important development of the 21st century, is this ability to hack human beings, to go under the skin, collect biometric data, analyze it, and understand people better than they understand themselves. This, I believe, is maybe the most important event of the 21st century. By hacking organisms, elites may gain the power to re-engineer the future of life itself. Because once you can hack something, you can usually also engineer it.
Natural selection is replaced by intelligent design. The era of inorganic life is now beginning.
In the coming decades, AI and biotechnology will give us godlike abilities to re-engineer life and even to create completely new life forms. We are about to enter a new era of inorganic life shaped by intelligent design. Our intelligent design.
Nobody will be safe if not everybody is vaccinated.
Are you vaccinated, if I
Yes.
may ask?
Yeah, I'm very pro-vaccination. I believe the science is unequivocal.
The difference of this fourth industrial revolution is it doesn't change what you are doing. It changes you. If you take genetic editing, just as an example, It's you who are changed. And of course, this has a big impact on your identity.
Can you imagine that in 10 years when we are sitting here, we have an implant in our brains, and I can immediately feel, because you all will have implants, and we measure your brain waves, and I can immediately tell you how the people react, or I can feel how the people react to your answers. Is it imaginable?
Just think of sensors planted into our brains.
Basically implanted in your skull. So, but it would be flush with your skull. So you basically take out a chunk of skull, put the Neuralink device in there. You put the electrode, you'd insert the electrode threads very carefully into the brain.
To build basically an interface to the brain.
Yeah. Electrode to neuron interface at a micro level.
Okay, what is it? Like, I'm gonna have like a plug in my head that's gonna fit into a hard drive? Like, or how does that work?
Yeah. A chip and a bunch of tiny wires.
This would be implanted surgically. And it would do what? Could you input? Could you download Jim?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
What?
The long-term aspiration with Neuralink would be to achieve a symbiosis with artificial intelligence.
What we have seen so far, it's corporations and governments collecting data about where we go, who we meet, what movies we watch. The next phase is the surveillance going under our skin. COVID is critical because this is what convinces people to accept, to legitimize total biometric surveillance.
One of the things that I think is so essential to free and open societies is freedom of thought. And up until now, the conversation we've been having is around freedom of speech. Once we can access people's thoughts and access people's emotion, we have to create a space that enables people to think freely.
What the fourth industrial revolution will lead to is a fusion of our physical, our digital, and our biological identities. It is important to use the COVID-19 crisis as a timely opportunity. So people assume we are just going back to the good old world which we had, and everything will be normal again in how we are used to normal, in the old fashion. This is, let's say, fiction. It will not happen. The cut which we have now is much too strong in order not to leave traces. Also be clear, the future is not just happening. The future is built by us.